Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Lewis McGlynn.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Saoirse Healy.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart. Broadcasting Scotland is Scotland's independent broadcaster, providing factual news, reporting on the issues important to the people of Scotland.
We are committed to public service broadcasting, and with your support, we will produce even more programmes.
Provide opportunities for young people interested in media production and broadcasting, and challenge preconceptions of what Scottish media looks like, amplifying Scotland's voice and reflecting its communities.
We can already deliver high-quality live news, and we will create the highest quality programmes for you to enjoy. But we can only do that with your support.
So please subscribe to and share our channel or donate to Broadcasting Scotland via the link in the description. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. The first item of business this afternoon is portfolio questions, and the first portfolio is Deputy First Minister Responsibilities, Economy and Gaelic. I'd invite members wishing to ask a supplementary question to press the request to speak buttons during the relevant question, and I call question number 1, Alasdair Allan.
To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to the recently published data from Scotland's Census on the number of people with Gaelic language skills, gus fáinneach de réaltas na hallapa déabheach go heice in the figure na chai uilseach an virage for cultus law in the hallapa who an arif de rúne ikkevel skillens Gaelic.
Deputy First Minister.
Wel, haar réaltas na hallapa curfaaltje naardigig luchtlavers na Gaelic gunt slui giet voor 1971 na gachger íslachig san arifsin. Hij seo shalting an nurtus reinig le opera slena Gaelic an film krullig agus planna coirsnach gus canin. Ach has sin ganjuchig na duliatas an egenich a ha haast down agus sin fulliseach vo mar a hucht of luchtlavers na nenain. Sé an dúlan fuasglach ein na duliatas an seo gus an bí Gaelic sesfach na Helenin agus a fast fieg Alapa. The Scottish Government welcomes the rise in Gaelic speakers recorded by the Census. It's the first census since 1971 not to show a decline in speakers. It demonstrates the progress that is being made in education, broadcasting, community, but we recognise the urgent difficulties still facing the language, something that was highlighted by the ongoing decline of speakers in our island communities. Our challenges lie in tackling those to ensure that Gaelic is sustained within island communities whilst also enjoying growth across the whole of Scotland.
Alasdair Allan.
Gyda cyffir fa eichgyn gyfer diwg fwy iddo fi gydas yn lŵr sy'n lwch giwnsach yn y Gaelig. Han y ffigur yn mae'r minister yn gra y geinsio sgiolwch eter ialwch an sgir yn fyr y fel nhw fyr y ro ych yn lwyryd y Gaelig iddo chlech gygolael. Yn yr un dyn rioltas barach gychantyn mi un cymr a han y ffigur yn sio sialtyn creonog dy lwch blawers yn y sgir yn y Gaelig. Dol y host bwy ydd polisi y rioltas a hwf taichlater stiechwch gys y Gaelig y gion os yn tawn y tiach. While it's welcome to see the impact of new and accessible resources for Gaelic learners on the overall number of speakers, the statistics, as the Minister says, tell another story in the Gaelic heartland. So can the Cabinet Secretary say how census data showing a decline in the number of Gaelic speakers in these communities will impact on Scottish Government's policy strategy to support the language's long-term survival?
Deputy First Minister.
Wel, haar réaltas na hallpa ganjuchig gyfel 4 chwtramach Gaelic gré lúdachig of luchtlavers na Gaelics na coirsnach gan seo. In drasta has sin listigig da roi oprach policy ure ha a hair fistrachig le toria na chunte slui a ha a kur taicher se ganen ek ire na coirsnach. Sin skieren canen sorrichtje a heid a kuren saas le bille na canen alabanach came a junsi a vjoigig canen a ha steegtje a coirsnach. Naar fikkerst don von bhíon oprach gar bethe corman economach is socialta don Gaelic bí sinna déalaigh ris na cúsin economicach na steine a hasáirte ris na coirsteach an dúchel is éilenach an tuk sibh imirug. Haid seo a tukul immerston a ha mar ha in sasléid policy Gaelic mar hiad canan corne nin Allan sheer is an opera ha bors na Gaelic lenting le beirin inadul gus planich Gaelic coirsnach ulchach an an uist agus leois. Agus am Birle, Scottish Government recognises the urgency of addressing the decline. We'll do that through the bill and also through the Short Life Working Group and those build on existing initiatives, for example, the Gaelic First policy in Corrigan and Allan Shear.
Question 2, Clare Adamson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what its priorities are for improving intergovernmental relations with the UK Government.
Deputy First Minister.
Well, intergovernmental relations have faced significant challenges since the Brexit referendum. The effective powers of the Scottish Parliament have been reduced and the UK Government has asserted a role in matters for the Scottish Parliament in a way not intended by the devolution settlement. The general election presents an opportunity to reset the relationship, especially if there is a new UK Government which takes a more constructive and respectful approach to relations and devolution. We will be ready to engage following the election, whatever its outcome, to deliver for Scotland while continuing to resist further encroachment into devolved policy and decision making.
Clare Adamson.
I thank the Deputy First Minister for that answer. The Institute of Government told the Constitution Committee that, quote, the operation of the intergovernmental relations machinery still tends to be quite patchy and dependent on the extent to which individual ministers and secretaries of state prioritise engagement with devolved bodies. The Deputy First Minister outlined some of the challenges that we've had, but we cannot have trust without the confidence that we can effectively legislate here. Does the Deputy First Minister agree that the best way forward for Scotland to engage would be as an equal footing as an independent nation in control of our own affairs?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, having been on the Constitution Committee ably convened by Clare Adamson until very recently, I take on board the comments that she has made from the Institute for Government. She's absolutely right that to engage as an equal partner is the only way to guarantee that the powers of the Parliament are respected, and that would certainly be in stark contrast to the experience that we've seen to date.
Question 3, Kevin Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government, as part of its work to develop a green industrial strategy, what discussions the Economy Secretary has had with ministerial colleagues regarding the role of hydrogen production in boosting economic growth?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, we have, the Cabinet Secretary for Net Zero and Energy and I have joint responsibility for and are engaged in extensive discussions on the Green Industrial Strategy, which will set out a clear view of the economic sectors and industries in which we have the greatest strengths and potential to develop globally competitive industries, and the development of a domestic hydrogen sector and hydrogen production for export, supported by a strong supply chain, including in Kevin Stewart's constituency, will play an important role in supporting that just transition. So the growth of our hydrogen sector presents significant long-term economic opportunities for Scotland and is a priority opportunity area for green growth.
Kevin Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I thank the Deputy First Minister for that answer. Can I ask the Deputy First Minister, what is the Government doing to maximise our potential by ensuring that vital plant required for hydrogen production is manufactured in Scotland? Are the likes of the enterprise agencies and the Scottish National Investment Bank actively providing support to companies here who may wish to diversify into areas such as the production of hydrogen electrolysers?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, in short, Scottish Government officials and the enterprise agencies are maintaining very close connections with domestic and international hydrogen developers to develop those opportunities to attract electrolyser manufacturers to Scotland. And in 2023, we commissioned an assessment into the state of the electrolyser manufacturing globally to support an understanding of the supply chain opportunities in Scotland. The figures speak for themselves through the Scottish Hydrogen Assessment Report, which concluded that the large-scale production of renewable hydrogen could create and protect between 70,000 to over 300,000 jobs and has potential GVA impacts of between £5 billion and £25 billion a year. So it's enormous.
Brief supplementaries first, Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. To make the most of the huge opportunity Scotland has in the green hydrogen economy will require investment at a significant scale. And yet the Scottish Government have cut this budget. It will take hundreds of millions of pounds to effect the change required to create those jobs in a just transition. Will the Scottish Government make the investment required and realise Scotland's potential?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, I think this is an area where we do see huge opportunity for Scotland, but we also need to be blunt in recognising the fact that the investment that's required is at such a scale that it does require both governments to work together and also to work with the private sector too. And that's where we need clarity and certainty from the UK Government in terms of the scale of the investment. The Scottish Government will continue to invest where we see big opportunity, but we do also need partners in the private sector and the UK Government to join us.
And Beatrice Wishart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Given Shetland's long history of energy production expertise, what role does the Scottish Government see for Shetland in the future Scottish hydrogen production industry and in terms of economic growth potential?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, I see a huge opportunity for Shetland and also for our island communities. As a representative of one myself, I think when it comes to this transition, we absolutely need to make sure that the benefits are enjoyed and that there is legacy benefits for our islanders in particular. I think Shetland and Orkney, if I may say so, have both demonstrated how to support communities in the last energy transition, which we can learn from and implement with this transition.
Thank you. Question 4, James Dornan.
To ask the Scottish Government what assessment it has made of the impact that Brexit is having on Scotland's economy.
Minister Tom Arthur.
Scotland's economy is continuing to suffer from the effects of the UK's exit from the European Union, a decision that the Scottish public were strongly against. Latest modelling by the National Institute of Social and Economic Research finds that the UK economy is currently 2.5% smaller than it would have been as a new EU member, and this impact is estimated to rise to 5.7% by 2035. Businesses continue to feel the difficulty of new trading arrangements. Latest results from the Business Insights and Conditions survey showed that of the businesses with 10 or more employees in Scotland that face challenges with exporting, 38.5% named Brexit as the main cause. This figure rose to over 40% in sectors such as manufacturing and retail and wholesale.
James Dornan.
Thank the Minister for that answer. The National Audit Office has reported that over £4.7 billion of public money is forecast to be spent in post-Brexit border arrangements, and HMRC estimates the customs declaration could cost UK businesses £7 billion every year. Can the Minister provide any update on what assessment the Scottish Government has made of the continued cost of Brexit to the taxpayer and businesses, unlike both Labour and Conservatives who wish to deny it's happening?
Minister.
As outlined, the latest analysis by NIESR suggests that the UK economy was around 2.5% smaller in 2023 than it would have been under continued EU membership. That means around £69 billion wiped from national income in 2023, which equates to £28 billion of tax revenue. In Scotland, this equates to lower public revenues of around £2.3 billion in 2023. And Brexit has also added further fuel to the cost of living crisis. Research by the LSE Centre of Economic Performance suggests that an increase in trade barriers has pushed up average household food costs by £250 since December 2019. These costs disproportionately impact low-income households who spend a greater proportion of their income on food.
Question 5, Murdo Fraser.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on what action it is taking to support the retail sector.
Minister Tom Arthur.
Our retail strategy sets out how we will work with businesses and trade unions to deliver a strong and prosperous retail sector, in line with the vision of the National Strategy for Economic Transformation. The strategy sets out a clear vision for the retail sector in Scotland that is successful, resilient, sustainable and profitable. It seeks to build on retail strengths and maximise opportunities for the sector to fulfil its potential and contribute to our economic transformation. Many retailers in Scotland also benefit from the Small Business Bonus Scheme, the most generous of its kind in the UK, which offers up to 100% relief from non-domestic rates.
Murdo Fraser.
Can I thank the Minister for his response? But the latest retail sales figures suggest that the sector is struggling. And of course the sector is also struggling from the fact that the government did not pass on the 75% rates relief available elsewhere in the UK to retail, hospitality and leisure businesses. Now, in the budget at the end of last year, the Scottish Government raised the possibility of an additional penalty, a rates surtax on larger grocery stores, something the sector is very strongly opposed to and would find very damaging. Is the Scottish Government intending to proceed with this?
Minister.
Can I thank Mr Fraser for his supplementary? In my previous role as Public Finance Minister, along with the then Deputy First Minister and Cabinet Secretary for Finance, I was part of several meetings with retail. Since taking up my new post, assuming lead responsibility for retail, I have met with the co-chair of the Retail ILG. At all of these meetings, this matter was discussed in depth. While a formal decision has not taken place as of yet, we are considering the representations from industry very seriously, and I am acutely aware of the concerns that they have expressed.
Supplementary, Daniel Johnson.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. And I remind the Chamber of my register of interest and the fact that I'm a member of Asda, the Shop Workers Trade Union. I was at the Scottish Grocers Federation election event yesterday afternoon. What's clear is the biggest issue facing the sector is retail crime. Indeed, if you look at the Asda survey, the proportion of retail workers reporting that they've suffered violence has risen from 2% in 2016 to 18%. Now, while this is largely a justice issue, I'm wondering if the Minister could outline how bodies such as the Industry Leadership Group could be used to coalesce and provide an interface with other parts of the public sector, and indeed could he outline what other ways the economy brief and portfolio is looking at how it can tackle this issue that's facing the industry?
Minister.
Well, can I join with the member in recognising the serious concerns that have been raised, and also commend Mr Johnson for his long-standing interest in this area and his leadership in taking forward a Members' Bill in the previous session of Parliament. This was a matter that was raised in my conversations with the co-chair of the Industry Leadership Group, and I'm happy to confirm to the member that there has been engagement on this particular matter, including with the participation of the Minister for Community Safety, Siobhan Brown. So there is a cross-ministerial engagement on this particular issue, and I'd be happy to provide more details on the engagement that has taken place and the work that has been taken forward in writing to the member if he's so interested.
And briefly, Jackie Dunbar.
The Scottish Retail Consortium is optimistic, citing Scottish Government policy, including the council tax freeze, as helping to support demand. Given the cost of living crisis continues to impact household budgets, can the Minister detail how the Scottish Government will continue to support retail and shoppers putting money back in folks' pockets?
Minister.
Scotland continues to face a cost of living crisis. The current high levels of inflation, while coming down, have disproportionately impacted the most vulnerable in society and have heaped more pressure onto our public services. The Scottish Government recognises the pressure on household budgets, which is why since 2022-23 we have continued to allocate around £3 billion a year to policies which help to tackle poverty and protect people as far as possible during the cost of living crisis. We have consistently called for the UK Government to provide additional support to people with the cost of living crisis, but the Chancellor has failed to deploy the full range of powers available to him to make the real difference that would be required.
Question 6, Gordon MacDonald.
To ask the Scottish Government how it plans to support entrepreneurs and start-up businesses.
Deputy First Minister.
We have a clear ambition to support entrepreneurs and become a leading start-up economy. That's evident through the progress in the delivery of the National Strategy for Economic Transformation, the Scottish Tech Ecosystem Review and the Pathways Report. Key successes include the £42 million Tech Scaler programme, 2 competitive funding rounds through the Ecosystem Fund and the Pre-Start Fund, and the Entrepreneurial Campus Blueprint. Those initiatives are designed to foster entrepreneurial activity and support start-up businesses.
Gordon MacDonald.
I thank the Deputy First Minister for that answer. Despite promises that leaving the EU would remove red tape, the most immediate impact of Brexit on entrepreneurs was the change in VAT regulations. With UK businesses now treated as a third country, VAT now applies to imports and exports to most EU countries. Retail Economics and Trade Bite are reporting an 18% drop in non-food exports from the UK to countries in the single market. Can the Cabinet Secretary outline more about the impact the Scottish Government expects these checks to have on small Scottish businesses?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, the impact of Brexit has certainly been painfully felt by both exporters and importers who have seen trade with the EU being overcomplicated and saddled with additional costs. That is thanks to the fact that there is now new barriers to trade, supply chains have been disrupted and food prices have been driven up. In fact, a recent National Audit Office report estimated that UK traders will face additional costs of £469 million per year. So we are gravely concerned about those burdens and urge the UK Government to pragmatically align standards with the EU to abolish some of those burdens.
Question 7, Sue Webber.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what it is doing to address the rise in unemployment in Edinburgh, as recently reported by the ONS.
Minister Tom Arthur.
In 2024-25, the Scottish Government has allocated up to £90 million for employability services. Edinburgh has a strong local employability partnership led by key employability stakeholders, including public, private and third sector organisations. The No One Left Behind approach is delivered locally, ensuring individuals receive person-centred and tailored support to help them progress into sustainable employment. Edinburgh and South East Scotland City Region deal has a key role in helping the region to thrive. The Scottish Government will contribute £300 million over 15 years, including £25 million towards an integrated regional employability and skills programme.
Sue Webber.
I thank the Minister for his response. Unemployment in Edinburgh has risen by over 50% from December 2022 to December 2023. Small businesses are at the heart of the capital's economy. However, they are not benefiting from the same level of support as their English counterparts. The SNP government's refusal to replicate the UK government's business rates relief means the average pub in Scotland is now paying £15,000 more than those in the rest of the United Kingdom. Further, this is replicated across various sectors in the economy, not just hospitality. What analysis has the Scottish Government carried out to compare and contrast the impact of their decision to lay in this additional burden on our small businesses? These are key, remember, to providing local jobs and employment opportunities for those living in the city.
Minister.
Well, let me join the member in recognising the importance of our SMEs, who are the backbone not just of the economy here in Edinburgh, but right across Scotland. I won't rehearse the arguments which have been well aired in this chamber with regards to the decision on retail, hospitality and leisure relief. As a member will recall, the position would have saw us having to commit hundreds of millions of pounds from other vital public services to enable that relief to take place, and that was simply a decision that we were not prepared to take. But we do, of course, continue to invest significantly in the small business bonus scheme, estimated at a cost of some £685 million this year, for which many small businesses, including in the hospitality sector, benefit from. The Government is committed to continued engagement with the hospitality sector and wider businesses who are liable for non-domestic rates. And indeed, my colleague Ivan McKee, as Public Finance Minister, we continue to take forward that work in conjunction with the Cabinet Secretary on non-domestic rates as we prove a new deal for Business Group.
Supplementary, Faisal Chowdhury.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Employability scheme can be a key in people joining the workforce or for parents rejoining after having a child. Despite this, the Scottish Government cancelled £53 million for employability scheme and scrapped their parental transition fund. Can the Minister advise how they will make up for this shortfall in funding to employability scheme, and what other measures the Scottish Government is taking to get people into employment in Edinburgh?
Minister. Well, as I set out in my original answer, we are providing £90 million of support for devolved employability schemes in this financial year, and we continue to work with partners to ensure the effective delivery, but recognising that delivery is takes place best on the ground locally to ensure there's a joined-up, holistic and person-centred approach. I am recently into post, and I am looking forward to engagement with local employability partnerships and other stakeholders across the summer. And in that spirit, if there's any particular areas the member would like me to engage with them on directly, I'd be more than happy to.
We can take another brief supplementary. Gordon MacDonald.
Thanks very much, Presiding Officer. Employment in Edinburgh is at 82% and has increased compared with the previous year. Can the Cabinet Secretary outline what steps the Scottish Government is taking to further boost Edinburgh and Scotland's economic activity?
And as briefly as possible, Minister.
Yes, certainly. There's a range of measures I already touched on, the city-region deal and the significant investment that is going to be channelled in through that. We also have our national strategy for economic transformation, and the First Minister has set out the key core priority of this government is stimulating economic growth, and that will be for all parts of Scotland, including in our capital city.
And question 8, Colin Beattie.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it has carried out any analysis of the potential impact that a policy to reduce net migration to the UK would have on its long-term labour market strategy.
Deputy First Minister.
Well, UK immigration policies currently and proposed fail to address Scotland's distinct demographic and economic needs. Migrant workers are vital in addressing the decline of our working-age population, and Scottish employers are increasingly dependent on migrant workers for a growing proportion of their workforce. The work of our independent expert advisory group on migration and population has consistently shown the economic benefits that migration brings to Scotland.
Colin Beattie.
Scotland has a declining working-age population. Migration will only become more important to maintaining a thriving economy and robust public services. Given that both the Tories and Labour seem determined to slash the numbers, does the Cabinet Secretary share my concerns about the potential impact on Scotland's workforce?
Deputy First Minister.
Absolutely and in full. Evidence shows that migrants who choose Scotland as their home do help to grow our economy, increase productivity and innovation, address skills shortages and make essential contributions to communities. We need to be able to access skilled labour, not least at a time where unemployment is at record low, and we know that particularly in rural areas we are facing the prospect of double-digit depopulation. We have launched Scotland's Migration Service in March, which provides vital information and advice to employers and people who have recently moved to Scotland as one way to mitigate those barriers, but ultimately it needs to be resolved at source.
Thank you. That concludes portfolio questions on Deputy First Minister responsibilities, economy and Gaelic. There will be a brief pause to allow front benches to change before we move to the next portfolio. Okay, the next portfolio is Finance and Local Government. Again, if any member wishes to ask a supplementary question, you press the Request to Speak buttons during the relevant question. And I call question number 1, Faisal Chowdhury.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what discussion it has had with local authorities regarding any further allocation from its budget, including for house building.
Cabinet Secretary Shona Robeson.
Throughout the budget process, I confirmed my intention to prioritise affordable housing if the UK Spring Budget delivered more consequentials. Unfortunately, they once again let Scotland down, and our capital budget is expected to reduce cumulatively by over £1.3 billion by 2027-28. Despite that, in April we announced an additional £80 million investment over 2 years for the acquisition of properties to be brought into use for affordable housing to help reduce homelessness. We will be discussing the allocation of the additional £40 million for 2024-25 with COSLA shortly, which brings this government's investment towards the delivery of affordable homes to nearly £600 million in 2024-25.
Faisal Chowdhury.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for the answer. In May, Edinburgh Council said it would not be able to deliver more government grant-funded affordable homes due to cuts to the affordable housing supply programme, which meant the council housing budget was 24% smaller. Now the Scottish Government has heeded Labour's call to declare a housing emergency. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree this should be met with action and the restoration of this money to local authorities to build affordable housing?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, first of all, of course, we have a good track record, having led the UK by delivering more than 128,000 affordable homes since 2007. Over 90,000 of those for social rent. That is, of course, higher than anywhere else in these islands. But we do acknowledge these are exceptionally challenging times, and that's why, of course, we agree that there is a national housing emergency, and that's why we continue to call on the UK Government to reverse the almost 9% cut to Scotland's capital budget, because if you have a cut to the capital budget and a 60% plus cut to financial transactions, which underpinned the affordable housing supply programme, that is going to have an impact. So what we need in the emergency budget, or the autumn budget that will follow the general election, is a reversal of that capital cut and a restoration of financial transaction funding.
A number of supplementaries. I'll try to get them all in, but they will need to be brief, as will the responses. First, Ben McPherson.
In the context of the real terms cut to the Scottish Government's capital budget, and also an impressive record of affordable house building, more than elsewhere in the UK per head of population, with the £600 million that has been allocated this financial year, a prioritisation here in Edinburgh would absolutely make a big difference, especially in Granton, in my constituency, where the land has been able to be purchased by the local authorities. So I would be grateful for the Cabinet Secretary's continued engagement in the realisation of the potential for affordable house building in Granton.
Well, as I said to Mr Chowdhury, officials are working to consider the allocation of the £40 million this year. The local authorities will direct the affordable housing supply programme investment to the priorities they've identified in their strategic housing investment plans. We know that in 23-24, £7.5 million was invested in Granton from the affordable housing supply programme to support the eventual delivery of more than 400 affordable homes. But it is absolutely a priority project for the City of Edinburgh, which we want to support.
Liz Smith.
Thank you. Something else, Cabinet Secretary, that will obviously help for local government and housing is if the Scottish Government met its promise to have multi-year funding within budgets. Are we any closer to getting that?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, of course, if the Scottish Government got multi-year funding in our budgets, we would then be able to agree multi-year funding settlements for local government, the third sector and others. But that's very difficult when we've only had single-year budgets set, because we then can't have the certainty to be able to provide that multi-year funding settlement. So that, obviously, is something we will take up with the UK Government post the general election.
Briefly, Beatrice Wishart.
When considering funding for house building, as well as with local authorities, what engagement does the Scottish Government have with renewable community benefits and business organisations like Salmon Scotland that express interest in investing in housing in rural areas?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think it's really important that we look at all of the options available to us, which of course is why the Housing Minister has convened the Housing Finance Task Force, because we need to look beyond traditional capital, particularly if that capital cut is not restored. So we are really keen to look at all vehicles that we can use, working with organisations like the ones that Beatrice Wishart mentioned, and of course other housing stakeholders, to lever in as much housing investment as possible.
Question 2, John Mason.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government when councillors' pay is expected to rise.
Cabinet Secretary.
Councillors received an uplift of 6.2% in April 2024, in line with the 2017 agreement with COSLA to annually uprate councillor remuneration. Scottish ministers are considering the recommendations contained within the report published by the Scottish Local Authorities Remuneration Committee earlier this year, and will respond in due course.
John Mason.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. I mean, MPs are paid £91,000 a year, we are paid £72,000, and the councillors get something like £21,000. It does just seem a little bit out of line, and yet councillors I know work just as hard as most MSPs and put the hours in and also make major decisions. Does she not agree that there is a bit of an inconsistency here?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, let me first of all recognise the point John Mason makes, that councillors play a vital role in local communities and decision-making across local authorities, and I'm grateful to all of their contributions. I'm currently considering the report in which SLARC set out their recommended remuneration rates for councillors, which reflect changing roles and responsibilities. Now, it's important that due diligence and consideration is given to the report, and as I've said, we'll publish our response in due course. But we do want to make sure that not just the current councillors, but that we do make it an attractive proposition for the future generations of councillors coming forward.
And briefly, Pam Gothel.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. COSLA President Shona Morrison told the Local Government and Housing Planning Committee that on the question of women's representation within councils, it always comes down to remuneration that is the biggest barrier. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree with this assessment, and what more is the Scottish Government doing to increase female representation within councils?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, can I first of all, I agree with Pam Gothel that I think remuneration is part of the picture of attracting more women into politics generally, whether that's local government or here in the Scottish Parliament or elsewhere. However, I think also culture has an issue to play here, and I know of many women who I've tried to encourage to stand, and they frankly look at our political environment and it puts them off. So I think we've all got a job to do of encouraging more women into politics at whatever level that is.
Question 3, Maggie Chapman.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government how its recently published public sector pay policy will support public sector workers to cope with the cost of living.
Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Government's public sector pay policy for 2024-25 sets out a multi-year framework offering pay metrics that are above the current forecast levels of inflation. We are continuing our commitment to paying at least the real living wage and are maintaining a progressive approach to pay awards. As a result of these policies, public sector staff in Scotland are paid 6% more on average than in the rest of the UK, demonstrating our support for workers through the cost of living crisis, despite the tight fiscal position we face.
Maggie Chapman.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response. The results from the Equality Impact Assessment on last year's public sector pay policy are clear. Pay proposals should be progressive and protect lower paid staff. There is a high representation of women, disabled people, those from a minority ethnic group and those from the younger age group among lower earners. Will the Cabinet Secretary consider recommending in future pay policies specific measures such as set pay ratios and targeted benefits to support ongoing work to reduce the gender pay gap and overall income inequality, and therefore better support people to cope with current and future economic crises?
Cabinet Secretary.
Can I say to Maggie Chapman that public bodies do, of course, have the flexibility to draw up their own pay proposals within the policy, but they're encouraged, of course, to consider a progressive pay approach, which may include setting a cash underpin or a higher percentage uplift or a non-consolidated cash payment. I think the matters that Maggie Chapman raised are important, and it's something that we encourage in terms of that support for the lower paid within the public sector pay policy.
Question 4, Rachel Hamilton.
The Scottish Government regarding any implications for its budget and public sector finances, what assessment the Finance Secretary has made of how much revenue the visitor levy could generate for local authorities? Cabinet Secretary.
Well, as a local tax, the level of revenue raised will depend, firstly, if a local authority decides to introduce a visitor levy. Secondly, on what percentage rate that it sets. In the Business and Regulatory Impact Assessment that accompanied the Visitor Levy Scotland Bill, the Scottish Government analysed a range of visitor levy percentage rates and what they would raise. As just one example, analysis indicates that if every local authority in Scotland were to introduce a visitor levy at 2%, then that would raise around £33.7 million.
Rachel Hamilton.
The Cabinet Secretary for her response. Some local authorities have justifiably not chosen to implement a visitor levy due to the administrative costs they would incur versus the income that they would generate. Can the Cabinet Secretary confirm if the Scottish Government have considered what would be the likely impact on their future funding settlement if a local council chose not to implement the visitor levy in order to protect its financial situation?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, as I said in the start of my answer, as a local tax, the level of revenue, of course, depends, firstly, if a local authority decides to introduce a visitor levy. There's no requirement for them to do so. This is our empowerment of local government with a range of fiscal levers, something I would have thought Rachel Hamilton would have welcomed. If they then decide that they do wish to proceed, then of course it is for them to decide at which rate, and they have to do the assessment and consultation that is set out with local businesses and other stakeholders before proceeding. Of course, any additional revenue raised by that council will, of course, not impact on any of the local government funding that they otherwise receive. This will be additional revenue. So I would have thought that this would be something that Rachel Hamilton would welcome.
Question 5, Clare Baker.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government whether Fife Council will be given assistance under the Bellwyn scheme.
Cabinet Secretary.
The Bellwyn scheme allows Scottish ministers to make revenue support available to councils to assist with immediate and unforeseen costs in the aftermath of emergencies that exceed the council's annual Bellwyn threshold. The key criteria of the scheme is to safeguard life and property and to prevent suffering or severe inconvenience. In 23-24, Fife Council did not submit a claim under the Bellwyn scheme. However, discussions are ongoing with Fife Council to explore alternative forms of support, including the delivery of targeted support for residents and businesses in Cooper badly affected by Storm Gerrit.
Clare Baker.
As the Cabinet Secretary has recognised, there have been significant problems in Cooper and across my region. There's been a number of significant flooding events. While local flood grants are available, the pressure on local authorities to manage the impacts of flooding and coastal erosion are increasing. As the Cabinet Secretary recognises, Fife Council has recently contacted both the Scottish Government and the UK Government to request an audit of the Bellwyn scheme and to seek more financial support for weather events beyond those classified by Amber. So can she say a wee bit more about how the Scottish Government responded to this request, if she thinks there is potential to extend the criteria of the Bellwyn scheme, and how can we all ensure that local authorities are better supported to meet the financial costs of flooding impacts in our communities?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, look, I'm happy to write to Clare Baker on some of the detail of this, but she does recognise the Bellwyn scheme, I think, goes back to about 2005. So we are keen to discuss with local government the arrangements going forward. We have agreed a number of recommendations from the work of the Scottish Government COSLA Flood Risk Management Working Group that was formed to look at improving some of the schemes and how it works. But I am absolutely open to looking at whether there's any further reform that is required. We, of course, have put in a great deal of investment into flood risk management, and we will continue to do that and support communities who are adversely affected. Happy to write to Clare Baker with some of the further detail around the Fife support and discussions that are ongoing.
And question 6, Fergus Ewing.
To ask the Scottish Government regarding the application of the principles in the Scottish Public Finance Manual, what its position is on whether the reported estimated cost of £3.56 million, that's £3,560,000 for refurbishment to decarbonise the Procurator Fiscal's office in Elgin, represents value for money in light of the property being valued at just £275,000 in March 2022.
Minister Ivan McKee.
The Scottish Government takes getting best value for money from public spend seriously, and we also recognise the need to meet our climate commitments. That includes spending the limited public money available for that purpose most effectively to achieve our targets. The member raises valid concerns about the value for money aspects of this particular investment, and I have to say I very much share those concerns. This project was intended to increase understanding of the technology and processes around deep retrofit of historic buildings. As such, it will not be replicated, but lessons learned should support cost-effective delivery of future projects. But the member can also rest assured that any future projects will be rigorously assessed to ensure public money is used most effectively to deliver the government's objectives, taking into account strict value for money criteria.
Fergus Ewing.
Well, Presiding Officer, I've long believed that the household implement of which the Scottish Government was in most dire need was the new broom. And from what I have heard, I'm pleased that in the Minister we appear to have found that new broom to secure value for money and avoid waste of money in investment in our public buildings and generally. And with regard to new projects, can the Minister use that new broom to prevent the further waste of money on a gigantic white elephant of a project of eye-watering proportions to build a new office for Scottish Government staff in Glasgow when there's frankly huge numbers of empty public buildings already available for its use?
Minister.
The member again raises a very important point. He will be delighted to hear that that particular project that is highlighted is under scrutiny at the moment. He will be well aware, as I am, that there is, of course, unused capacity within Scottish Government and agency premises within Glasgow, and any proposals for any new capacity would need to be viewed in the light of whether it was required in terms of capacity, and also to meet those very strict value for money criteria that I have already outlined.
Question 7, Sian Dowie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what assessment it has made of the potential impact that replicating the non-domestic rates relief available to businesses in England would have in Ayrshire, including relation to job creation.
Minister.
The Scottish Government has a long-standing commitment to delivering a competitive rates regime that supports businesses and communities, including in employment. The Scottish Budget delivers a non-domestic rates relief package worth an estimated £685 million in 2024-25, including a number of reliefs which are not available elsewhere in the UK, and up to 100% relief for hospitality businesses on islands, including Arran and Cumbria in the member's own constituency. Due to the generous small business bonus scheme and other reliefs, we estimate over half of properties in Ayrshire don't pay any rates at all, as at the 1st of July 2023. Well, Scottish ministers are sympathetic to calls to replicate the rates relief available in England in the retail, hospitality and leisure sectors. Doing so would have meant that the Scottish Government could not provide the NHS, schools or emergency services with the funding they require.
Sian Dowie.
I thank the Minister for that answer. Across Scotland, in the year ending December 2023, 74.7% of people aged 16 to 64 years were employed. However, in South Ayrshire, this figure was significantly lower at just 65.2%. South Ayrshire is home to fantastic businesses with so much to offer, but they face multiple challenges, including high business rates, which leave them at a disadvantage. Given that the average pub is now paying £15,000 more in tax than their counterparts in the rest of the UK, would the Minister not agree that this money could have been better used by these small businesses to hire more staff, particularly young people?
Minister.
Well, if the member is advocating for cuts to the NHS or to the education budget, then that needs to be considered in that context, if that's the proposal and the choice that she is advocating. Of course, the Scottish Government works very hard to support employment prospects across the country, including in Ayrshire. My colleagues, the economy ministers, do so on a daily basis. But it's worth remembering, as I pointed out, that half of businesses in Ayrshire don't pay any rates at all. 95% of non-domestic properties in Scotland continue to be liable for lower property tax rates than elsewhere in the UK. A number of reliefs are available in Scotland that aren't available in England, including day nursery relief, fresh start relief, hydro relief and others. And half of properties in retail, hospitality and leisure are eligible for 100% relief in Scotland in the current financial year.
And supplementary, Gordon MacDonald.
Thanks very much, Presiding Officer. Thanks to the Scottish Government's budget decisions, businesses across Scotland continue to benefit from the most generous small business bonus scheme in the UK. Can the Minister provide any update regarding what assessment the Scottish Government has made of the number of businesses in Scotland that this supports?
Minister.
The last snapshot date on the 1st of July 2023, over 114,000 properties were taken out of rates altogether as a result of the Scottish Government's policies, with at least 98,000 benefiting in some form from a small business bonus, which, as a member acknowledges, is the most generous scheme of its type in the UK.
Thank you. I'm not able to call question 8 as Mr Golden is not in the chamber. I have not received an explanation for this, which I will expect along with an apology. But with that, we conclude portfolio questions, and there will be a brief pause before we move to the next item of business to allow front benches to change.
Thank you. The next item of business is consideration of Business Motion 13580 in the name of Jamie Hepburn on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau, setting out a timetable for the Stage 3 consideration of the Abortion Services Safe Access Zones Scotland Bill. Any member who wishes to speak to the motion should press the Request to Speak button now, and I call on Minister Jamie Hepburn to move the motion.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. No member has asked to speak to the motion. Therefore, the question is that motion 13580 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. The motion is therefore agreed. The next item of business is Stage 3 proceedings on the Abortion Services Safe Access Zones Scotland Bill. In dealing with the amendments, members should have the bill as amended at Stage 2, that is SP Bill 34A, the marshalled list and the groupings of amendments. The division bell will sound and proceedings will be suspended for around 5 minutes for the first division of the Stage 3. The period of voting for the first division will be 45 seconds. Thereafter, I will allow a voting period of 1 minute for the first division after a debate. Members who wish to speak in the debate on any group of amendments should press the Request to Speak buttons or enter the letters RTS in the chat function as soon as possible after I call the group. Members should now refer to the marshalled list of amendments. And I call Group 1, Minor Amendment. I call the Amendment 1 in the name of the Minister in a group on its own, and I call on the Minister to move and speak to Amendment 1. Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I hope all members will agree that Amendment 1 is uncontroversial. The definition of protected site was added at Stage 2. It is currently defined as the protected premises and its grounds. However, not all protected premises will have grounds. Therefore, it's more accurate to define the protected site as the protected premises and any grounds. This amendment does not affect the substance of provisions around what defines a protected site, and although it does not have a policy impact, it is nevertheless an important change to make the bill clearer and more easily understood. I move the amendment.
Thank you, Minister. I do not see other members at this point. I call Gillian Mackay.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. I support Amendment 1 and am grateful for the improvement it makes. I'm keen for legislation to be written in a way that's understood by all, especially one that has so much importance as it offers protection to women and staff, and I encourage members to vote for this amendment.
Thank you, Ms Mackay. Has the Minister anything to add by way of wind-up?
I thank Ms Mackay for her supportive words. As members have heard, this is not contentious, and I therefore ask you to support this and vote for it.
Thank you, Minister. The question is that Amendment 1 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
The Parliament is agreed. I now turn to Group 2 on signage. I call Amendment 2 in the name of Megan Gallagher in a group on its own, and I call on Megan Gallagher to move and to speak to Amendment 2. Ms Gallagher.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This amendment would include a requirement for operators of a protected premises to include signage that outlines the safe access zone and summarises the restrictions of the zone. The amendment requires that the operator displays the sign on the day the safe access zone takes effect, and it also allows ministers to make regulations about the signage. However, those regulations would be subject to affirmative procedures. I am grateful for the conversations that I did have with the Minister and Gillian Mackay on signage, and I hope that they do understand the good intentions for bringing this amendment through at stage 3. It is not my intention to push the amendment today. However, I did want to raise it within the Chamber because I do know that signage wasn't included within the original consultation process, and allows for the matter to be brought forward to the Chamber just in case any member does have any further comments that they do wish to make. I think from my perspective, I am content with the reasoning I received from the Minister and Gillian Mackay in relation to why they would not support this amendment at stage 3, and it's in relation to health boards making their own decisions in terms of whether signage would be appropriate or not outside the particular premises that it involves. So with that, Presiding Officer, I'm content with that answer that I got from the Minister and Gillian Mackay at stage 2, and I do not intend to press at stage 3. Thank you.
Yes, and Ms Gallagher, could I ask you to move the amendment formally?
Not moved. Thank you.
No, I think the procedure would be require you at this stage to move because you have spoken to the amendment, and then we can get to the next bit when we get to the next bit.
Moved. Thank
you, Ms Gallagher. And I call Cara Mochan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I am just going to make a short contribution really to say I appreciate Megan Gallagher's contribution on this matter, both at stage 2 and at stage 3, because we did have a great deal of discussion on this matter. And we understand fully in Scottish Labour the arguments for and against signage, but on balance we do believe the health boards have the option to install signage, and that may be the best way to do that. So I appreciate that Megan Gallagher will not press the amendment, but I wanted to say that I do appreciate the way in which she's approached this.
Thank you, Ms Morgan. And I call on the Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I thank Ms Gallagher for the support she has given to this bill and the interest that she's taken in this issue. Whilst we may not agree on the amendment, I have no doubt that it's been brought forward through a desire to see the bill implemented successfully. And I found the conversations that we had very helpful as we moved forward with the bill. As Ms Gallagher acknowledged, I had concerns about requiring signage as I set them out to the committee at stage 2, but I thank her for bringing this amendment forward again and allowing me to set out these concerns to the Chamber. I will be brief. Ms Mackay will also speak about the concerns involved, in particular those of service providers, so I will only say that I share these too, and I also share Gillian Mackay's hesitancy to overrule service providers when there is some doubt as to the effectiveness of signage. I do want to highlight, however, what the bill already requires and how that will be supplemented by the Scottish Government. This already represents a considerable package of efforts to ensure those affected by zones will be made aware of them and their effects. Firstly, as members are aware, the bill already requires that Scottish ministers publish and maintain a list of all safe access zones in Scotland. This includes not only the name and address of every premises, but also a map which will clearly identify the zone. The Scottish Government is also committed to a targeted publicity campaign. This includes writing to known anti-abortion groups to make them aware of safe access zones and the criminal sanctions that will attach to activity that would result in an offence. We continue to work through the details of the full campaign, but it's likely to also involve leaflet drops to residents within the zone and notices in public venues such as GP surgeries. Finally, Police Scotland have told us of the approach they anticipate taking to policing zones. This involves a graduated response and begins with engagement, explanation and encouragement before any enforcement action would be taken. For these reasons, I remain of the view that signage would do little to raise awareness of zones that will not be achieved by other means. I do again thank Ms Gallagher for bringing forward this amendment, and I'm pleased to hear that she doesn't intend to press.
Thank you, Minister. I call Gillian Mackay.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. I want to thank the Minister for that and note that I support everything she said. And I want to thank Megan Gallagher for the collegiate nature that she's approached many of these issues in. I don't think it's necessary for me to repeat the particular concerns the Minister raised in relation to this amendment, but I do have some more general concerns with a specific requirement on signage. As the Health, Social Care and Sport Committee heard during its evidence session, signage is not a straightforward matter. During the extensive engagement with service providers ahead of the bill's introduction, a consistent message has been the concern that signs will draw attention to abortion services that might otherwise go unnoticed. As has been discussed a number of times since the bill's introduction, this may present a particular challenge where women and staff are especially anxious about being identified, for example in rural areas or areas with small sites. It is, of course, the case that zones must be publicised, and the Minister has already spoken of the steps that will be taken to do so. However, and as I set out at stage 2, signs would be an ongoing physical demarcation. They would be visible to every passer-by, not just those who may wish to organise or attend planned anti-abortion activity. Part of the concern, therefore, is they could provoke more ad hoc, sporadic instances of targeting. And in light of some of the genuinely horrific stories from other countries, there's palpable anxiety among some staff about erecting such a permanent advertisement. I accept these concerns must be weighed up against what is fair and necessary for those who might wish to express opposition to abortion services. I want to again thank Megan Gallagher for noting that she's not going to press this amendment and for her engagement throughout the process.
Thank you, Ms Mackay. And I call on Megan Gallagher to wind up and to press or withdraw Amendment 2.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I apologise for getting ahead of myself at the start there. I've heard everything that the Minister and Gillian Mackay has had to say about signage, and I do agree with them. Certainly no one wants to make or cause any further distress to women who are simply trying to access healthcare. So with that in mind, I will not be pressing this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Megan Gallagher seeks to withdraw Amendment number 2. Does any member object? No member objects. And Amendment number 2 is therefore withdrawn. I now turn to Group 3, Offence, Exemption and Defence. I call Amendment 3 in the name of Megan Gallagher, grouped with Amendments 4 and 5. And I call on Megan Gallagher to move Amendment 3 and to speak to all amendments in the group. Ms Gallagher.
I move, Presiding Officer, this amendment will make it an offence to photograph, record, store, broadcast and transmit anything of a person without the express consent when the person subject to the recording is in the safe access zone for the purpose of accessing or approving abortion services at the protected premises. This again was another amendment that I discussed with the Minister and Gillian Mackay. Again, I do not intend to press this amendment today. However, it is one that I think is worthy for further discussion, because this is about, again, protecting women. It's making sure that it is not okay to photograph any woman or any member of staff entering or leaving protected premises as highlighted within the bill, but also to make sure that all of the stipulations attached to that would be recorded within the bill itself. However, having had discussions with the Minister and Gillian Mackay, I understand, of course, the concerns that they have raised about this, also drawing attention to groups who may wish to try and find different alternatives in terms of standing outside of healthcare facilities. So with that in mind, again, I don't intend to press this when the time comes, but I am grateful for the discussions that I have had with the Minister and Gillian Mackay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Gallagher. I call Jeremy Balfour to speak to Amendment 4 and other amendments in the group. Mr Balfour.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I start by thanking both Gillian Mackay and the Minister for the helpful engagement we've had between Stage 2 and Stage 3. I brought a similar amendment at Stage 2, and both the Minister and Gillian Mackay offered the opportunity for further discussions around that, and I think those have been helpful. But I think it is also helpful to have the amendment debated a bit further this afternoon. This amendment seeks to carve out an exception in the law for those who are carrying out chaplaincy services at protected premises. The services rendered by chaplains and leaders from all faiths cannot be understated. They are often meeting with people at their lowest point and providing pastoral care that can be absolutely key to a patient's recovery. They are a fundamental part of hospital care. For that reason, it's crucial that they are free to have open, honest and frank discussions that cover a wide range of issues. It should be up to the patient to decide the content of those pastoral conversations, not the law. To be clear, Presiding Officer, this amendment is not seeking to give licence to chaplains to pressure people into one decision or another. It does not give them the ability to set up a stall or protest, and it does not even necessarily give them licence to bring up the topic. That must be led by the individual wanting the pastoral care. And it does not create a loophole that allows activists to demonstrate or harass. But it does allow chaplains from all faiths to respond to patients who are seeking guidance or a faith perspective on the care options going forward. If I could move to amendment number 5 in my name, this amendment includes the defence of reasonableness to the bill. It is worded exactly in the same way as appears in the Hate Crime Act passed by this Parliament. The bill is seeking to tread the fine line between ensuring that women and staff can access these services while upholding the rights of freedom of speech, expression and religion. And I think, in all fairness, both the member and the Minister recognise that it's a balancing act that we are walking in regard to this legislation. But I think this defence is fair, and it would provide assurances to concerned groups that there will not be overzealous prosecutions that cover activities that are not dangerous or harmful. This assurance would help to protect freedoms and ensure that the law is not over-harshly applied. Given the support for this defence in the hate crime bill, I hope it can also achieve some support this afternoon. After all, no one, I'm sure, in this chamber is suggesting that reasonable behaviour should be prosecuted, and this amendment guarantees this, and it should not be an issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Balfour. And I call Cara Mochen.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm going to speak briefly to the 3 amendments. Amendment 3, I really appreciate again the member's contribution with regard to Amendment 3 around filming, recording, sketching, because we in Scottish Labour are sympathetic to this issue. We have seen harrowing scenes outside premises over the last few years on broadcasting, and it's so easy now on social media platforms. So we understand how harrowing that is for patients and staff. However, it is helpful that the member is not going to press the amendment, because we do believe that placing behaviours on the face of the bill could cause problems after discussion with Gillian Mackay and the Government. So, again, thank you for the member's reasonableness in this area. On Amendment 4, I really wanted to say that I appreciate Jeremy Balfour's contribution on this amendment, both at stage 2 and now again at stage 3. This has given us additional time to discuss this important issue. The right of pastoral and chaplaincy services to conduct legitimate business and provision of service is absolutely right, and they must have confidence to do so. And I know that within the committee stages we discussed this at length. We considered it again and again, and the matter that we are speaking about I discussed this week with Gillian Mackay, and in my view, considering the legislation as is drafted, I am confident that we wouldn't criminalise anybody carrying out that legitimate business or service. In terms of Amendment 5, again, can I thank the member for his considered contribution on this amendment, and he's absolutely right that the balance of human rights is key to this piece of legislation, and it is correct that we as legislators consider this at every stage of the bill. Scottish Labour have a long history of supporting freedom of expression and understand this legislation is asking us to balance that human right. In addition, we do not wish to have, as I've said, any single behaviours added into the bill, and there was some discussion around that with this amendment. So we believe that on balance the legislation is written tightly, and that prosecutors would assess whether there was a breach of behaviour or not. So we wouldn't support this at the decision time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Morgan. And I call the Minister.
Thank you.
I thank members for meeting with me ahead of Stage 3 to discuss the concerns these amendments reflect. I believe that these open conversations testify to the true cross-party working that has characterised this bill as it has progressed through Parliament. I am sure that this will be replicated today. If I turn firstly to Ms Gallagher's Amendment 3, as I explained during Stage 2, during the bill development, it was concluded that the existing offences could capture photography or filming as acts which are intended to or reckless as to the effects set out in the offence provisions. It is not normal practice to provide for an offence where an existing offence adequately covers it. Additionally, we must avoid doing anything that would significantly undercut the approach taken to offences within the bill. The offences are broadly drafted to avoid criminalising specific behaviours and instead can capture any activity that could have the effects outlined in sections 4 and 5. The bill, therefore, does not set out a list of prohibited behaviours because it is the intended effect that matters. This is essential for future-proofing. It is not difficult to understand why photography or recording could have the prohibited intended effects because women are accessing medical care and making extremely personal decisions. Consequently, if someone filmed or photographed a person accessing or providing services in a safe zone, that would be very likely be caught by the existing provisions, provided it was done recklessly or with the intent of having one of the particular effects. Ms Gallagher's offence amendment also differs to existing offences in significant ways. Firstly, unlike sections 4 and 5, it does not specify that the person accused of an offence must be in the zone at the time the behaviour is carried out, meaning it could extend to behaviour out with the zone. Secondly, it lacks the intention or recklessness elements, potentially making it much broader. It could, for example, apply to a person who simply took a photograph and inadvertently captured someone in a zone attempting to access services. Finally, it requires evidence that action has been taken and directed at particular individuals, whereas sections 4 and 5 require only that the effects are intended to have particular effects, or that those effects could occur due to recklessness. I stress, as I did during Stage 2, that I recognise and welcome the intention to increase protection. But I hope Ms Gallagher accepts that the issue, and I believe she does, was considered during the drafting stage and that the inclusion of the specific offence was deemed unnecessary. So I note Ms Gallagher has indicated she will not press this amendment, which I thank her for and very much appreciated the engagement that we had. On Amendment 4, I committed at Stage 2 to exploring with Mr Balfour what might be possible or necessary, and I am grateful for the very productive discussions we subsequently had. However, having considered what he seeks to achieve, I again urge him not to move his amendment. Today, I also met with the Evangelical Alliance to discuss this amendment with them, and I was clear that it is not our intention to prevent those accessing abortion services from receiving spiritual care, nor to prevent those providing such care from doing so. Having fully understood Mr Balfour's concerns, I believe it is better to rely on the existing protections within the bill and avoid unintended loopholes. I understand Mr Balfour is particularly concerned that those providing spiritual care could be caught by the bill's offences, and to address this, I will say 3 things. Firstly, there is already an exception within the bill for interactions between someone accessing services and anyone accompanying them with permission. This would apply to family members, friends and, of course, spiritual advisers. Therefore, if a woman seeks spiritual support as she accesses services and invites someone to accompany her and provide it, that person will not commit an offence unless they behave in a way that could be either intentionally or recklessly have the particular effects set out in sections 4 and 5. Secondly, if spiritual advisers are offering care to others within the zone who are not accessing abortion services, and that private conversation nevertheless covers abortion, that is also very unlikely to be an offence. The exception would be if the conversation was carried on intentionally to have the prohibited effects or is reckless as to whether it has those effects. Thirdly and finally, where someone accessing services requests a visit from a spiritual adviser, that too would ordinarily be a form of wanted support rather than being an unwanted or unwelcome conversation.
Again, where that conversation is true support, is private and is neither intended nor is reckless as to whether it does have any of the effects set out in the offence provisions, such support is unlikely to give rise to an offence. It's important to note two things in reference to all of these scenarios. Firstly, recklessness is a high bar. It means, for example, acting with utter disregard or with a high level of indifference as to the impacts of the behaviour on others. Secondly, I have said an offence is unlikely to be committed because the facts and circumstances will always determine whether that is the case or not. For example, there may be cases where an advisor goes beyond their support role or does not limit themselves to private conversation or displays very prominent anti-abortion material that could be seen by others. A specific pastoral exception would also not permit such behaviour, and including one could have the unwanted effect of encouraging others to claim to be offering spiritual care in order to have one-on-one conversations with those accessing services who have not sought support. Even limiting such an amendment to those who are, for example, employed as chaplains or ordained in churches would not entirely remove that possibility, but might inadvertently appear to limit the protection for spiritual providers who may not be captured by an exhaustive definition. This could potentially create a loophole for unwanted influence while unintentionally erecting a barrier to those wanting support. I urge the member not to move this amendment, and if he does, I ask the Chamber to vote against it. Finally, I turn to Amendment 5. I must reiterate the significant concerns I outlined at Stage 2. This amendment runs directly counter to the Bill's aims, as it could allow behaviour to be considered reasonable, despite the behaviour meeting the high threshold for the offence provisions. This means the potential protection provided by the Bill could be significantly diminished. A person could admit they had intended to influence someone accessing services, but to also claim, for example, that they did not know that they were in a safe access zone, no matter how extensive the publicity around it was. They could claim it was a weekend and they thought premises would be closed. They could claim that the strength of their belief or their own particular circumstances justified the offence. They could state they intended to provide support for women accessing the services and were therefore justified. Of course, it will always be possible for an accused to make these arguments. It is their right to produce mitigating evidence in their favour. But including a reasonable excuse defence could create potential loopholes from the outset. As I said at Stage 2, no safe access zones legislation across the UK includes such a defence. In Northern Ireland, it was considered during parliamentary passage and rejected for the reasons I have outlined. And it was the absence of such a defence that the Supreme Court was asked to rule on when it considered the Northern Ireland legislation. The Supreme Court held that the offences within the Bill, which are broadly similar to those we are considering here, constituted a proportionate interference with the rights of anti-abortion groups in light of the importance of the Bill's aims. And crucially, the Supreme Court considered that the inclusion of a reasonable excuse defence would impact the effectiveness of its provisions with regard to those aims. It remains the Scottish Government's view that similar considerations apply here. I thank the member for bringing forward this amendment and allowing a full debate in the Chamber on this topic, but I urge the member not to move this amendment, and if Mr Balfour does, I ask the Chamber to vote against it.
Thank you, Minister. I call Gillian Mackay.
The Minister's spoken comprehensively on these amendments, so I won't add too much to it. I understand that Ms Gallagher's intention here is to further ensure women can access healthcare free from unwanted influence and harassment, and I thank her for the constructive conversations we've had, particularly between stages 2 and 3. As I mentioned, I share the Minister's position that the current offences are already capable of capturing someone who is filming or photographing a person accessing or providing services, either recklessly or with the intent of influencing decisions to access services, impeding or preventing access, or causing harassment, alarm or distress. I also share the concerns that this amendment potentially broadens the scope of the offence to an activity that happens outside of the safe access zone. Turning now to Mr Balfour's amendments 4 and 5, I'll begin by saying we had more than one discussion about his concerns prior to stage 3, and I hope that he found those conversations as helpful as I did. My significant concern with Mr Balfour's amendments is that they could create potential loopholes to allow unwanted influence and erode the protections offered by the bill. Whilst I have no doubt that this was not Mr Balfour's intention, it could nonetheless be the reality if his amendments 4 or 5 passes. We must ensure that we avoid creating loopholes and that this bill's protections are as robust as possible. And for that reason, I urge the member not to move his amendments, and if he does, I ask the Chamber to vote against amendments 4 and 5.
Thank you, Ms Mackay. And I call on Megan Gallagher to wind up and to press or withdraw Amendment 3. Ms Gallagher.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I welcome the comments that have been made in relation to my amendment and to Jeremy Balfour's amendments 4 and 5. If I could start with my amendment firstly, I completely understand where the Minister and Member are coming from in relation to current protections within the bill. The intent, again, was to strengthen the bill as much as possible to make sure that women did not face unwarranted harassment or recording, particularly in the days of social media, as Carol Mocken pointed out within her contribution. If I may turn to my colleague Jeremy Balfour's amendments 4 and 5, these are important amendments because it is the right checks and balances that we need for bills such as these ones, because in terms of chaplaincy services, it is right that we are protecting the right to freedom of religion, making sure that choices are made by individuals and they've got the right care, services and support required for them in their time of need. And in terms of the defence of reasonableness, as Jeremy Balfour highlighted, this has been used within previous legislation to strengthen the legislation, but also determining when behaviour is reasonable, because of course there are measures and metrics in terms of what is acceptable and not acceptable when it comes to behaviours. And for that reason, I do believe that 4 and 5, in terms of amendments, were right to bring to the Chamber today in order to have further discussions. Turning back to my amendment number 3, as advised previously, Presiding Officer, I do not intend to push this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Gallagher. I would advise the Chamber that Megan Gallagher seeks to withdraw amendment number 3. Does any member object? No member objects. Amendment number 3 is therefore withdrawn. I now call amendment 4 in the name of Jeremy Balfour, already debated with amendment 3. Jeremy Balfour, to move or not move?
Can I thank the Minister for helpful words, and in the light of those, I won't move amendment 4. Amendment number 4 is not moved. I call amendment 5 in the name of Jeremy Balfour, already debated with amendment 3. Jeremy Balfour, to move or not move? Not moved.
Amendment number 5 is not moved. I now turn to Group 4, definition of protected premises. I call Amendment 6 in the name of Jeremy Balfour in a group on its own, and I call on Jeremy Balfour to move and speak to Amendment 6. Mr Balfour.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's fundamental role of this Parliament to ensure that the actions of this Scottish Government and actually any future Scottish Government receive proper scrutiny. The purpose of this amendment is to make sure that any expansion of the definition of protected premises comes before the Parliament in a super affirmative process. This is simply to allow the Parliament and the Parliament committees to give the appropriate scrutiny to what would be a fairly major change within the legislation. There are over 900 GP surgeries in Scotland and over 1,200 900 GP surgeries and 1,200 pharmacies, the vast majority of which are on the high street. If this definition was expanded for protected premises, it could, in theory, shut down every one of these and would stop demonstrations, stores, or even possible conversations happening outside them. I understand that at stage 2, the Government made it clear that they could see a time in the future when it might be necessary to expand the definition of protected premises, and that any limit of this expansion would be unacceptable. In my view, Deputy Presiding Officer, we as a Parliament need to make sure that when we are passing any form of law, that it has the appropriate scrutiny. This will not stop it happening, it won't delay it excessively, but it will allow the committee and the Parliament to be reassured that this fundamental change in the law has had proper scrutiny. And for that reason, I do move the amendment in my name.
Thank you, Mr Balfour. I call the Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I recognise that Mr Balfour is seeking to strengthen safeguards in the bill with Amendment 6, and I accept that Section 10, to which the amendment relates, does require robust scrutiny. However, I am resisting this amendment precisely because I believe the bill already includes important safeguards and provides for an appropriate level of scrutiny. Those safeguards begin from the moment a change is contemplated. Firstly, at stage 2, I brought forward an amendment to ensure the powers could be used in a targeted way to cover only individual premises within a class of place, where that is more appropriate than covering the entire class. That means, as a purely illustrative example, that if GP practices were approved as a class of place to provide abortion services, ministers could, if appropriate, extend protection to cover a single practice or even some rather than all practices. Secondly, as a matter of law, Scottish ministers must act compatibly with the European Convention on Human Rights. All decisions must therefore be evidence-based. Ministers will consider the full circumstances at the time, including the impacts on Convention rights, and no additional protected premises can be added unless ministers are satisfied that it would be proportionate to do so. Then, once regulations are prepared, they will rightly be subject to the affirmative procedure and the full scrutiny of the Parliament. As I set out at the start, I remain of the view that the affirmative procedure is the right approach and provides the appropriate level of scrutiny. The Delegated Powers and Law Reform Committee considered this power at stage 1 and concluded, and I quote, "The affirmative procedure appears appropriate given the potential significance of the measures such regulations could introduce. The affirmative procedure will give the Parliament an opportunity to ensure it is content that such regulations strike the right balance between Convention rights." Mr Balfour's amendment, though well-intentioned, would, as a matter of practicality, introduce a potentially very significant delay before we are able to provide protection, even though from the safeguards I have outlined, we must have evidence that service users and providers need it. And as a matter of principle, it would send a clear message that we do not think the usual affirmative procedure provides a robust level of scrutiny and parliamentary oversight. If we accept that here, it unavoidably sets a precedent for other regulations. That is not a step we want or need to take. I therefore urge members to accept the careful and considered judgment of the Delegated Powers and Law Reform Committee and vote against Amendment 6 if Mr Balfour presses.
Thank you, Minister. I call Gillian Mackay.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. I've got very little to add to what the Minister has already said. She set out very clearly the safeguards the bill already provides and the negative consequences this amendment could bring. I'll only add that as a member of this Parliament, I believe the scrutiny we provide when affirmative regulations are laid results in strong and effective challenge, and we shouldn't undermine that by suggesting otherwise. And we certainly should not do that when the result is that for no or very little benefit, in this case, it will certainly take longer to protect women and staff when we have evidence that they're at risk of harm. I therefore also urge that, if pressed, members do not vote for Amendment 6.
Thank you, Ms Mackay. And I call on Jeremy Balfour to... I've got a late entrant here. I call Bob Doris.
Thank you, President Officer. It's just a very brief contribution. I listened carefully to what Mr Balfour said. Some of his concerns that he raised, I raised as an intervention to the member leading on the legislation at stage 1, and I was going to follow the exchange between the Minister and Mr Balfour very closely this afternoon. I've done so, and I'm reassured that there's no blanket provisions contained within the legislation, which was absolutely my concerns during the stage 1 process, and that any change will be brought forward by an affirmative instrument and not just a decision made by a minister. I think that gets the balance absolutely right. So just to put on the record, President Officer, that I did have concerns at stage 1, but what I've heard this afternoon, I think, achieves the correct balance in relation to scrutiny and proportionality.
Minister, do you have anything to add in response to Mr Doris?
No, I have nothing to add.
Ms Mackay, do you have anything to add in response to Mr Doris?
Nope, just want to thank Mr Doris for his interest.
Thank you, Ms Mackay. I now call on Jeremy Balfour to wind up and to press or withdraw Amendment 6. Mr Balfour.
Thank you, Deputy President. I am slightly confused if, and that's probably me rather than the Minister, with the Minister's response to this. We do have super-affirmative here. We have used super-affirmative previously, so this is not a new process that we're suddenly doing. So I don't accept that this sets a precedent in regard to if we use it here, we will then be forced to use it in every other piece of regulation that comes forward. I think there has been recognition in the past that we do need, when it is controversial, when it is legislation that needs that scrutiny, that this is the appropriate way forward. And I think, picking up the words of the Minister, super-affirmative does give the Parliament full scrutiny powers. If we don't accept this, it doesn't mean that we have full scrutiny power by a committee and by a Parliament. And this would be, whether it is one premises or a number of premises, would be a fundamental change, and I think does need that proper scrutiny. I also, with respect both to the Minister and to Gillian Mackay on this one, don't accept that it will bring massive delay. The timescales for super-affirmative are laid down. They are not onerous. Oh, with pleasure.
Thank you. I'm sorry, intervention, Graham Simpson.
Thank you. I know it was a surprise, but I'm listening with interest to Mr Balfour, and I speak as a former convener of the DPLR committee, so it's a little bit technical, this, but Mr Balfour has described the affirmative procedure as possibly improper. It's not improper, it is proper. It's just the super-affirmative procedure is better and more rigorous. So I think that's the argument he's trying to make. Would he agree with me on that?
Jeremy Balfour.
As always, I'm very happy to agree with my colleague. And as a new member of the DPLR, I look forward to learning about this more. But I do think there is a genuine issue here, that where we are making a fundamental change to the right of people in regard to the human rights, that the Parliament should use all its powers to make sure that they are happy with. And for that reason,
Ruth Maguire.
I thank Jeremy Balfour for giving way. He's speaking about rights, and that's absolutely correct, but would he acknowledge that it's about women's rights to access healthcare as well? So there is a balancing. It's not just about one set of rights we're talking about.
Jeremy Balfour.
Can I thank Ruth Maguire for that intervention? Absolutely, and I think I made that clear in regard to when I was moving my amendments around the other two areas, that it is a balance between these two. It's a balance that I think Gillian Mackay has worked hard to get right in regard to that. If there happened to be a change by a future government in regard to that, I think the Parliament should just take a bit longer and use all its powers to make sure that everyone in the Parliament was happy with that. And for that reason, I will be moving the amendment.
Thank you. The question, therefore, is that Amendment 6 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed, and there will be a division. As this is the first division of the Stage 3, I suspend for around 5 minutes to allow members to access the digital voting system. We will now restart proceedings, and we will now proceed with a division on amendment number 6, and members should cast their vote now. Thank you. The vote is now closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 6 in the name of Jeremy Balfour is yes 29, no 81. There was one abstention. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I now turn to Group 5 on guidance, and I call Amendment 8 in the name of Rachel Hamilton in a group on its own. And I call on Rachel Hamilton to move and speak to Amendment number 8. Ms Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I move the amendment in my name? And can I also thank Gillian Mackay, MSP, and the Minister Jenny Minto for engaging. It was welcome and it was refreshing, and it was nice to have a collegiate approach. So, Amendment 8 outlines that ministerial guidance must include information on how to assess the effectiveness of safe access zones in protecting the rights of those who wish to access the service or those who provide and facilitate the provision of abortion services without fear of intimidation or harassment. And that goes to the heart of what we're trying to achieve here. This amendment aims to improve the guidance given to operators to assess the effectiveness when establishing, extending, reducing or terminating the safe access zones for protected premises. The Minister and Gillian Mackay, there's quite a lot of...
Indeed. Please resume your seat for a second, Ms Hamilton. There's far too much noise in the chamber. We need to hear Ms Hamilton speak to her amendment. Ms Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. When I engaged with the Minister and Gillian Mackay over my original amendment, which I lodged at stage 2, we had a fulsome conversation about how I could achieve my intent of this amendment. And Gillian Mackay and the Minister suggested that they would look at including it in guidance. And I was very grateful to that. So I'll just look forward to what they have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Hamilton. And I call on the Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thank you to Rachel Hamilton for bringing this amendment. Although I must oppose it, we had an extremely productive discussion ahead of stage 3, for which I am very grateful. I am in full agreement with Ms Hamilton that safe access zones must be assessed in a way that goes beyond simple numerical analysis, such as offence statistics and level of activity outside premises. Our aim from the outset of this process has been to protect access to healthcare, to ensure that those accessing or providing services can do so without fear of and fear from intimidation, harassment or public judgment. And we must find ways to measure how well we are achieving that in ways that truly consider patient and staff experience. However, I do not think this amendment is the way to do that. My first concern is that there is already a provision in section 11A for the effectiveness of zones to be reviewed, and that requirement quite rightly sits with ministers. That review will also be published and laid in Parliament. It is true that operators have judgments to make around whether the zones for their premises offer protection from the specific offences set out in the bill, but I do not think that role should be extended to cover a more general review of effectiveness that requires them to consider different factors. I fear doing so would put an undue burden on healthcare staff, especially when, as I've said, that responsibility must and ought to be discharged by ministers. My second concern is the way this amendment could potentially cut across the specific instances in which operators must consider the adequacy of protection offered by safe access zones. As members are aware, operators may apply to ministers for an extension of a zone for their premises under section.
Jamie Green.
Can I thank the Minister for taking my intervention? My understanding of the amendment as it's currently worded, though, contrary to what's just been said by the Minister, is it's dictating what should be in the guidance, not what the operators must do. So that contradicts what's just been said by the Minister. It's simply explaining what the guidance should contain, not necessarily statutory owners' duties on the operators themselves.
Minister.
I thank Jamie Green for his intervention, and I'm just going on to cover that. As members are aware, operators may apply to ministers for an extension of a zone for the premises under Section 7 of the Bill. They can make such an application when they consider that the size of the zone does not adequately protect those accessing, providing or facilitating service from the behaviours which are prohibited in the zones, for example, influence or alarm or distress. There will be a range of factors that operators may take into account in making an application, and those may vary over time. It was therefore considered more appropriate to provide that these factors would be set out in guidance rather than prescribed on the face of the bill. Section 11 allows for this to happen, and in doing so balances the need for flexibility with the need to support operators to make what may sometimes be difficult judgments. This means there is already a very clear test set out in the bill that operators must consider before making an application for an extension. As members will note, Ms Hamilton's amendment is not framed in the same terms as that test. The reference, for example, to fear and intimidation differs from the effects zones seek to prevent, such as influence and impeding access. This amendment consequently could add confusion about the assessment and considerations that operators must undertake.
Rachel Hamilton.
For taking the intervention. It seems to me that what she describes in the what is going into the guidance in the government amendment that's already there is not implicitly looking at the access to healthcare, and I think that goes to the heart of this bill, and that's what's motivated me to do this, because we all had to coalesce around this bill, which has actually been quite a challenging bill. There's been little legislation recently that has been as challenging as this for us all to grapple with. And I think that accepting that individuals have on the face of the bill the indication of what we want to achieve from the guidance is really important.
Minister.
I thank Rachel Hamilton for her intervention. As I said right at the start of my comments, the aim from the outset of this process has been to protect access to healthcare, to ensure that those accessing or providing services can do so without fear of and free from intimidation, harassment or public judgment. And I believe that Ms Hamilton wants to ensure that the effectiveness of zones is given full consideration. Therefore, while I can't support this amendment, I commit to working closely with the member over the summer on the scope and terms of the review to ensure that they bring valuable and holistic scrutiny if the bill is passed today, which I believe is what Ms Hamilton is looking for. And I do hope that that provides Ms Hamilton and the Parliament as a whole the assurances that are required. Therefore, I urge Ms Hamilton not to press her amendment, and I urge members not to support it in the event that it is pressed.
Thank you, Minister. I call Gillian Mackay.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. I echo the Minister's appreciation for Rachel Hamilton's willingness ahead of Stage 3 to explore how the bill can be strengthened, and I am in complete agreement that the review of safe access zones must be meaningful. However, I must echo the Minister that this amendment isn't the best way to achieve that, and support what the Minister has said in her explanation. I do, however, welcome the Minister's offer to work with members over the summer to shape the scope of the post-legislative review, and I'm more than willing to help support that process if helpful, and I hope that that satisfies what Ms Hamilton is looking for from her amendment. I hope that Ms Hamilton won't press her amendment, but if she does, I urge members not to support it in the event that it is pressed.
Thank you, Ms Mackay. And I call on Rachel Hamilton to wind up and to press or withdraw Amendment 8. Ms Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As I said in our previous meetings, many of us want to make sure that this bill is as effective as it possibly can be. And it's a very new concept. And so far we have very little comparison to draw from other legislators on this particular issue. And so therefore we are tiptoeing to what we hope will deliver the right outcome. So in the spirit of collaboration, I will not press. I would have been interested to have found out whether other parties would have supported this, but I'm sure that the Minister will extend her invitation and welcome her offer to shape the post-legislative review through the summer, and I accept that. Thank you, and I won't be pressing.
Thank you, Ms Hamilton. I would advise the Chamber that Rachel Hamilton seeks to withdraw Amendment number 8. Does any member object? No member objects. Amendment number 8 is therefore withdrawn. I now turn to Group 6, Review of Act. I call Amendment 9 in the name of Tess White, grouped with Amendments 7, 10 and 11, and I call on Tess White to move Amendment 9 and to speak to all amendments in the group. Ms White.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. At stage 2, I lodged an amendment on reporting and review of the Act to facilitate post-legislative scrutiny. The amendment sought to implement the recommendations of the Health, Social Care and Sport Committee's Stage 1 report on the bill in this area. I agreed with the Minister and Gillian Mackay that we would work collaboratively on this issue prior to Stage 3, and I thank them for their shared working and engagement with me. Amendment 9 in my name revisits information on the use of the new offences created by the Act. I understand from the Minister that the standard range of reporting measures on these offences will be available and that she anticipates these details should be included in the post-legislative review report. Presiding Officer, should is not must. And my amendment introduces a requirement to include data on the number of arrests, criminal proceedings and convictions in such a report. Given the balance of rights involved in this legislation, I discussed the possibility of reducing the review period from 5 years to 3 years with the Minister and Gillian Mackay, and I'm really pleased that my suggestion has been taken forward by the Scottish Government and Rachel Hamilton in Amendment 11. My Amendment 10, which I've worked on with the Scottish Government and Ms Mackay, will put beyond doubt that enforcement agencies must be consulted during the review process. The effect is that Scottish ministers, when undertaking a review, must consult Police Scotland and the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service, the operators of protected premises or their representatives, and such other persons as are considered appropriate. I move Amendment 9. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms White. I now call on Gillian Mackay to speak to Amendment 7 and other amendments in the group. Ms Mackay.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. I will first speak to my Amendment 7. It's a minor amendment to Section 11A that ensures that ministers can delegate both the function to carry out the review of the legislation and also the function to prepare a report of the review's findings. I'll touch only briefly on Amendments 10 and 11. I'm happy to support both. As I noted during Stage 2, it is important that we give the Act time to bed in and do not unduly burden health workers and enforcement agencies. I think the change to timings proposed by Amendment 11 achieves a reasonable balance. Additionally, while consultation with enforcement agencies and operators would have happened as a matter of course, given the need to ensure the review is robust, I am content that Amendment 10 makes the consultation explicit on the face of the bill. Turning finally to Amendment 9, I must ask that Tess White does not press it. I remain fully convinced that the information she seeks will be taken into account during any review. I can also confirm that information relating to crimes committed under Safe Access Zones legislation will be published annually. This includes information on numbers of crimes recorded, criminal proceedings and convictions. There will therefore already be transparency built in around how the offences operate in practice, and this will happen more regularly than this amendment allows. The annual data may also provide a fuller picture than this amendment could provide, given the arrest data is not readily available and is not the most reliable metric because it does not cover instances where a crime is recorded but no arrest is made. In light of this ongoing transparency and the different purpose of the review, I do not think it's wise to prescribe these criteria. The review must cover a range of factors, including staff and patient impacts. As Rachel Hamilton has mentioned in our discussions, it must take a broad, holistic look at the legislation. To be clear, this amendment does not prevent consideration of these wider factors, and I know Tess White does not intend that it should. However, in setting out only these specific examples, I think there is a real risk that, particularly in the future, it will bend the review in that direction. That also presents a related risk. It's my hope that in time, this bill, if passed today, will mean that women and staff do not encounter anti-abortion activity within zones because it is no longer carried out, not because the police regularly intervene to prevent it. However, if that happens, absence of activity must not be seen as a definitive sign that the protection safe access zones offer is no longer necessary. When I brought forward the amendment to insert the review requirement at stage 2, it did not prescribe such matters specifically to avoid that kind of limited approach, and I have a real concern that Amendment 9 would reintroduce that danger. I therefore hope that Tess White will not press Amendment 9, and if she does, I ask the Chamber to vote against it.
Thank you, Ms Mackay. I call Rachel Hamilton to speak to Amendment 11 and other amendments in the group. Ms Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and can I thank Gillian Mackay for her support for my amendment, and I move that in my name, Presiding Officer. Amendment 11 will reduce the review cycles from 5 years to every 3 years. It's essential that the legislation maintains effective protection for those accessing and providing abortion services, and I believe this amendment achieves a more reasonable balance between ensuring the legislation is operating effectively without the formal review process becoming overly burdensome. This amendment does not change the timing of the initial review, which must be conducted within 2 years of commencements. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Hamilton. I call Karen Mochan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I just wanted to speak in this section because of the importantness of a review. Can I thank the members for all the amendments in this area? We have considered them all because review of the Act and of the zones in themselves is an important element to the success of the legislation. And if we can review within reasonable timeframes and with reasonable collection of data, this will ensure the ongoing effectiveness of the legislation. So, considering all the amendments in this section, we do support Amendment 10. We believe this is reasonable and manageable, and we support Amendment 11, changing from 5 to 3 years. This is a reasonable adjustment and recognises the contribution from members about reviewing this important piece of legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Mochan. I call the Minister.
Thank you. Firstly, I would like to say that I agree with Ms Mackay's views on these amendments, so I will not repeat what has already been said. The bill provides for the ability to delegate both the review and reporting functions. I therefore welcome and support the clarity Amendment 7 seeks to provide. The Government has always been clear in our commitment to transparency and ensuring that this Parliament is given its rightful role in the scrutiny of legislation. As this is the aim of both Amendments 10 and 11, I am also happy to support them. I can see that the ability to conduct a review every 3 years would also ensure that the legislation remains proportionate and in line with its overall aims. Finally, I do not support Ms White's Amendment 9. However, I very much appreciate the conversations that we held. This amendment seeks to set in stone specific statistical detail which should be included in the report. While I understand the reasons to include data on offences, I am not convinced that this amendment would provide a full picture of how the Act is operating or how effective it is. Any reporting needs to be able to balance out the statistics with anecdotal evidence and should be taken in the round as opposed to relying on solely figures. As Ms Mackay has already explained, crime statistics are routinely reported. Therefore, this information should be made available through other routes. Tess White's Amendment 10 already provides for the consultation with enforcement agencies as well as operators and other such persons as are considered appropriate. My view is that the information needed to provide a truly meaningful report can be captured through this route, and I think that in my previous discussions with Ms White, this has been her intent. However, Amendment 9 does not provide for that. I therefore join with Ms Mackay in urging Ms White not to press Amendment 9.
Thank you, Minister. And I call Tess White to wind up and to press or withdraw Amendment 9. Ms.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I will be brief. And I thank the Minister for her remarks in relation to the recording and reporting of offences, and it's welcome that this is on the official record. Nonetheless, I do intend to press Amendment 9 in my name, and I also welcome the cross-party working on Amendment 10, given the issues involved and the rights affected in this legislation. It is very important that the review of this Act is robust. I therefore urge members to support Amendment 10. Thank you.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 9 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. Point of order, Martin Whitfield.
Presiding officer, it's really to seek your guidance. It seemed as the timer was going on, it leapt from 15 seconds to vote closed during that debate. I'm just wondering whether my vote was recorded.
It was longer than 45. It was longer than 15 seconds. Or it was 30 seconds. It was 5 hours longer. Yeah, it was longer. My laptop's not. Yeah. I thank Mr Whitfield for his point of order. I would say two things. One, his vote has been recorded. Two, in fact, the voting division time was longer because of a technical issue. It wasn't a shorter period of time, but in fact a longer period of time, if that provides any assurance. Thank you. Point of order, Craig Hoy, who's online.
Apologies, Deputy Presiding Officer, my app froze. I would have voted yes.
Thank you, Mr Hoy. Your vote will be recorded. Thank you. The result of the vote on amendment number 9 in the name of Tess White is yes 29, no 79. There was one abstention. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I now call Amendment 7 in the name of Gillian Mackay, already debated with Amendment 9. Gillian Mackay to move formally.
Move formally.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 7 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
The Parliament is agreed. I call Amendment 10 in the name of Tess White, already debated with Amendment 9. Tess White, to move or not move?
Moved, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 10 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is agreed. I call Amendment 11 in the name of Rachel Hamilton, already debated with Amendment 9. Rachel Hamilton, to move or not move?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 11 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is agreed. That ends consideration of amendments, and there will be a short pause before we move to the next item of business. Thank you. Thank you. We will now move to the next item of business. Before I do so, I would say that, as members will be aware, at this point in the proceedings, I am required, under standing orders, to decide whether or not... Members, could I ask those who are leaving the chamber to please do so without all this chatting, because we're trying to move on to the next item of business. Thank you. So, to repeat, as members will be aware, at this point in the proceedings, I am... Trying to get on with business, Mr Day, thank you. I am required under standing orders to decide whether or not, in my view, any provisions of the bill relates to a protected subject matter. That is, whether it modifies the electoral system and franchise for Scottish parliamentary elections. In the case of this bill, in my view, no provision of the Abortion Services Safe Access Zones Scotland Bill relates to a protected subject matter. Therefore, the bill does not require a supermajority to be passed at stage 3. So the next item of business is a debate on motion 13571 in the name of Gillian Mackay on Abortion Services Safe Access Zones Scotland Bill at stage 3. I would invite those members who would wish to speak in the debate to please press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Gillian Mackay to speak to and to move the motion. Ms Mackay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. There's only one place to start these remarks, and that's with a heartfelt thank you to every single member of this Parliament. When I took on this bill, I knew it had the potential to be divisive. I've said this much in this chamber. I think most of us have grown used to the idea that politics is combative, and at a time when it already seems as though all debate can easily descend into name-calling and accusation, I was fully prepared for, at the best, a few rocky moments. Some of the members have offered challenge, some have asked difficult questions, and a small number have told me that the bill isn't necessary. But everyone has been respectful. Everyone's acted in good faith, and everyone has recognised that this bill is about protecting women's access to health care. And everyone has approached this debate in that spirit, even where we've disagreed. So when I say I'm grateful to you all, it's not a platitude. It's a genuine appreciation for allowing me to see and be part of this Parliament at its best. I offer specific thanks to Clare Hawkey and the members of the Health, Social Care and Sport Committee. The Stage 1 consideration was thoughtful, fair and always robust, and the questions and recommendations have resulted in a stronger bill, particularly around the requirements for consultation and post-legislative review. Also, a thank you to everyone who took the time to meet with me and the Minister between stages or to put forward amendments. As we've seen this afternoon, a number of those have also improved how safe access zones will be reviewed. And even where amendments were not accepted, they fostered debate and tested the rationales that underpinned the drafting. This is exactly what the parliamentary process is for, and I've valued every moment of it. Of course, the bill did not begin in Parliament. It began with the strength of women and staff who had the courage to say that enough was enough and then to demand change. I know that wasn't easy, and I know it must have sometimes felt like they were fighting a losing battle. But today, I hope they'll see those efforts pay off and know what a huge part they've played in achieving protection for women and staff for years to come. That protection, of course, will be seismic for women and staff, and we should never downplay the individual difference it will make, nor indeed the significance of telling women all across the country that their privacy and dignity are not open to public debate at the point where they're receiving care. But I also want to once again provide reassurance to those who oppose this bill. If it's passed today, the bill will create zones of 200 metres around 30 sites in the whole of Scotland. Within those zones, it is true that those who oppose abortion will not be able to target women or staff accessing or providing services. They won't be able to behave in ways that try to influence decisions, impede access or cause alarm, harassment or distress. But in every other part of the country, the right to demonstrate opposition to abortion will be unchanged. Presiding Officer, no democracy can survive where opposing views are silenced or where people are denied freedom to speak and express ideas. I know there are those who sincerely believe this bill does threaten those rights. I can only say that I'm confident it does not, that the Scottish Human Rights Commission considers it does not, and that parliaments across the UK and Ireland have reached the same conclusions while passing their own safe access zones legislation. I do not expect to convince those who still have doubts this afternoon, but I'm certain that time will do what I cannot. Presiding Officer, I will conclude shortly, but at stage 1, I read out testimony from women and staff who encountered the kinds of behaviour this bill aims to prevent. Now let me add to that Lily Roberts' testimony to the committee. She said, and I quote, "If buffer zones had been in place when I had my experience, they would have made me feel really safe. I do not think that it is too much to ask for safety when you're accessing healthcare." This afternoon, that is exactly what this chamber can deliver. So I urge everyone, listen to that testimony and join me in voting for the bill at stage 3. I move the motion in my name.
Thank you, Ms Mackay. I now call on Jenny Minto. Minister, around 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I too would like to reflect on what our Parliament has achieved here, even before we take the final vote on this bill. We have shown beyond doubt that our Parliament can come together in the service of what is right, that our differences, rather than being an obstacle to progress, can improve debate, improve legislation and bring light rather than heat. I believe that this is a profound achievement, given that it has happened over an issue that had the potential to drive us further into entrenched and divided camps. And I offer my sincerest thanks for the politeness, the respect and the sensitivity as this legislation has passed through our Parliament. It has been a privilege to participate in this process, and if we vote in favour of this bill today, I believe we should celebrate not only its passing, but also the manner in which we reached this point. This bill is a vital step in ensuring the safety, dignity and privacy of individuals seeking abortion services, as well as that of the dedicated healthcare professionals who provide them. This is incredibly significant. And as Gillian Mackay has noted, the protections are narrowly and carefully drawn. They cover only those places where opposition to abortion focuses directly on women taking deeply personal medical decisions, decisions that can be painful and unwelcome, decisions which should not be subject to public debate, to unjustified scrutiny or to unsolicited judgment. Even if this bill passes, the rest of Scotland will remain open for political debate or lobbying around abortion. Within the law, people will be free to protest anywhere else they choose. Indeed, they will be able to express lawful opposition to abortion in any form they see fit, and freedom of religion, expression and assembly will remain cornerstones of our democracy. But in 30 specific zones, this bill will mean those rights cannot come at the expense of a woman's right to safety and privacy, and I think that is a reasonable compromise. However, this bill will not simply be passed and forgotten about. It is always an important ministerial duty to ensure that legislation remains fit for purpose, and thanks to this Parliament's intervention, this bill has clear review requirements. And I give you my assurances that these reviews will be meaningful And if the bill is passed today, I repeat my commitment that we will begin the work of setting out how this will be achieved without delay. And I go further and commit that it will be an open, transparent and inclusive process. It will be a reflection of the collaborative and respectful process that brought the bill into being. And, Presiding Officer, to conclude, I would like to thank the Health, Social Care and Sport Committee under the convenership of Clare Haughey for their diligent work in considering the bill. I know that for them, the complexity and strength of feeling meant it was not always an easy task, but they set the tone for what followed with their open and honest consideration. For this, along with their constructive recommendations and insights, I am enormously grateful. I would also like to thank members across the Chamber who have engaged with Ms Mackay and myself. Everyone approached these discussions with a clear wish to improve the legislation. And to Gillian Mackay, she has championed this issue with grace and compassion, never losing sight of the women and healthcare staff who need this bill's protection, whilst always respecting the concerns and viewpoints of those who opposed it. And my final thanks go to the women and staff who took a chance and shared their stories, even when doing so was difficult and the outcome uncertain. Presiding Officer, when I opened Stage 1, I quoted Edwin Morgan's poem, Open the Doors. It therefore seems fitting that I do so again now. Don't let your work and hope be other than great. Those who told their stories certainly did not fail in this. Soon we will have an opportunity to requite them. I am sure we will take it and vote for this bill.
Thank you, Minister. I now call on Megan Gallagher. Around 4 minutes, please, Ms Gallagher.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And may I begin by echoing the comments made by Gillian Mackay and the Minister in relation to the tone of this debate, but also to thank everyone involved in the Members' Bill at all stages. I've said this before in the Chamber, but today isn't a debate about abortion. Members will rightly have their views on abortion, and all views are valid, but it's not for today. Today's debate is about women and their right access to healthcare safely, and their right of access to healthcare safely. That's why the Scottish Conservatives will be supporting the bill at Stage 3 today, because women shouldn't feel threatened or intimidated, especially when they're going through one of the most difficult and traumatising times in their lives. The bill brought to this chamber by Gillian Mackay puts in place measures should groups congregate outside premises where abortions can take place. We have been in the unfortunate situation where women have felt unsafe and have even missed their healthcare appointments because graphic placards have been placed by some groups outside clinics. People have tried to directly influence women's decision-making. Women have been harassed or felt judged for making a decision that they felt was necessary. And some groups have tried to prevent access from being gained to the premise by patients and staff. It has long been my own personal view that no one should deliberately influence a woman's right to have an abortion, and it is unacceptable for those to think that they know better than the person who has made a decision about their body. However, as it has been highlighted in the amendments that we've just debated today, all options should be made available for women, and they should not be restricted by legislation should they wish to seek support and help from various different places. But that's why we need buffer zones. So there's a clear marker for women to know what measures are in place to support them. And I hope the Minister and Gillian Mackay took the amendments that I brought to the Chamber today on signage and recording with the sincerity intended. I want to make sure this legislation works, but also to ensure that women are protected when accessing clinics, and I know that they do too. But that doesn't mean this bill is perfect, and I know through discussions with the Minister and Gillian Mackay that we will need to review the bill to measure if it has been successful and to make sure the right information is being collated. And I was pleased that the Parliament accepted amendments submitted by my colleagues Rachel Hamilton and Tess White on this very issue. But we also need to look at arguments such as freedom of speech and expression. Although these were well rehearsed at Stage 2, some do argue that silent prayer does not come under intimidation or harassment, and it's something that the bill hasn't yet resolved. However, I do appreciate the approaches outlined by the Minister and Gillian Mackay regarding police involvement and the engagement exercises that will be undertaken as a result of the legislation passing today. One of the amendments I raised at stage 2 was in relation to potential legal challenges, and it is my understanding that this bill could be challenged as a result of today's vote. I'm sure this might not be unexpected, but it reaffirms the importance of scrutiny at all times to ensure that legislation holds up. As a Parliament, we have a duty to create good law. However, I do hope that this bill goes through plain sailing and we are able to make sure that women are able to access healthcare safely. Finally, Presiding Officer, I think we owe it to the brave women and healthcare staff who have put themselves forward to give evidence and to share their experiences. This bill would not have been possible without them in campaigns such as Back Off Scotland. We owe it to them, and I'll finish by thanking them for challenging MSPs right across this chamber to make sure that accessing healthcare for women is safer. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Gallagher. I now call on Callum Mochan similarly for around 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In opening this debate for Scottish Labour this afternoon, can I begin by thanking everyone who has worked together to get this legislation to stage 3. As has been mentioned by previous speakers, it has been respectful, this process, which I am really thankful for. I thank the Health, Social Care and Sports Committee and members right across the chamber who have worked so closely together. But I also want to really importantly thank all those who gave evidence to the committee at stage 2. I just want to turn now to Gillian Mackay and thank Gillian Mackay for working so closely with campaigners to bring something here into our Parliament to move forward as legislation. Gillian Mackay has worked closely, as we've all said, across party lines, and hopefully this will allow us to achieve the passing of this bill this evening. Can I thank the convener of the Health, Social Care and Sports Committee, Clare Hockey, for the stage 2 debate, which I believe was one of the best debates I've been involved in within my time on the committee. The debate at stage 2 showed a real willingness to express views and work together to achieve an outcome that would allow this legislation to work in the interests of women seeking health care. It was clear everyone took this matter very seriously. On a personal level, I have been supportive for the introduction of safe access zones to protect women accessing abortion services, and it has long been the view of my party that Scotland should pass this legislation to ensure safe access to health care for women. It is right that we take all steps necessary to protect women accessing abortion services, and I do believe the introduction of safe access zones will achieve this. Presiding Officer, the truth is access to abortion clinics is access to health care, and this legislation, when passed today, allows us to talk about this openly and ensure women facing intimidation do not have to do so. Members, we can all understand visiting a healthcare setting can be worrying and stressful for a whole variety of reasons. But women accessing sexual health services, specifically abortion services, we heard can go through an extremely challenging and emotionally traumatic time. We heard this evidence during our committee stages. Women need to have safe access to services and advice that they require, and I do believe the bill will work to achieve this. I think it is fair for me to say that the evidence given to committee was of good quality, it was honest, and I found it extremely helpful to hear from people on their views, whether they were for or against safe access zones. I think that's an important point in terms of what we discussed within the stage 3 debate, where we felt that it could be difficult to discuss these things. But I feel both professional guidance, lived experience of those accessing services and those outside of clinics gave me much to think about and much to add to our working on getting this legislation and the balance of this legislation correct. Presiding Officer, there is so much to cover in this legislation in the short time I have, but I just want to mention that Scottish Labour support the view of proportionality and legitimate aims. It has long been Scottish Labour's view that any restriction of human rights brought by any bill must be kept to an absolute minimum, and we are content that this bill achieves this. I did mention this in the stage 1 debate, but I think it is worth noting again.
In the very short time that I have left, I just want to say that the Stage 3 debate was helpful and that we are particularly keen to pick up on the post-legislative scrutiny of the bill. I agree that robust post-legislative scrutiny is important to understand how the legislation is working for the women that require access. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much, Ms Mochan. I now call Maggie Chapman, again around 4 minutes. Ms Chapman.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I was a victim of sexual assault and had to book an appointment with Chalmers. Already blaming myself and terrified to tell anyone. I was 17 and completely by myself. A small group of individuals, mostly male, were standing on the other side of the road. I was repeatedly called out to by one of the men, and when I glared at him and ignored him, he called me a teenage murderer. I have never been pregnant, I have never had an abortion, and I've never even used a contraceptive medication, but they tried to publicly humiliate me for it. I felt threatened and terrified in a time when I needed protection and comfort. Protection and comfort. This is precisely what this bill seeks to provide. And as lawmakers, giving our citizens protection and comfort should be among our key priorities. So I am very pleased to open on behalf of the Scottish Greens this afternoon. I am delighted that we will pass this bill and give people, like the young woman whose words I have just quoted, the protection and comfort they need. The legislation we debate today is the culmination of years of campaigning by women, healthcare professionals and other activists, and we owe them all a huge debt of gratitude. Because this bill is about access to healthcare. At a time when globally we are seeing worrying regressions in women's ability to access the care they need, we should be firm in our resolve to progress the right of people to access healthcare. As the UK Supreme Court highlighted when assessing the balance of rights in the Northern Irish legislation, abortion is legal as a result of democratic decision-making. Therefore, opponents to it must not be given free and unfettered ability to harass individuals going about accessing their legal rights, including those enshrined in Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights. Similarly, medical professionals carrying out legal duties should not be prevented from doing so. Protest against legislation, including laws relating to abortion, is legitimate and must be protected. Articles 9, 10 and 11 of the ECHR make this clear. But such protest need not, indeed must not, take place outside healthcare settings. So this legislation is proportionate and, according to the UK Supreme Court, does not unfairly restrict rights to freedom of religion or belief, expression and assembly. To quote Dr. Audrey Brown, Chair of the Scottish Abortion Care Providers, "The decision to have an abortion is a private one between the pregnant person and the staff providing care." Dr. Brown is clear that the presence of anti-choice activists at clinic and hospital entrances causes emotional harassment for those seeking abortion care and the staff. Their offensive language and distressing images upset not only those accessing care, but also individuals who have experienced pregnancy loss. Such protests can further traumatise those making difficult decisions, often under traumatic circumstances like rape or medical issues. While abortion providers respect the right to protest, they too oppose harassment and intimidation at clinical sites. In closing, Presiding Officer, I want to thank and congratulate my colleague Gillian Mackay for her tireless work on this legislation and for being such a powerful advocate for the right to access healthcare free from intimidation and harassment, and the right for workers to get to and from work without intimidation or harassment. Thanks to the diligent work of the Health, Social Care and Sport Committee, and of course to all those campaigners and activists who've been calling for these protections and supporting women and healthcare staff who have had to run the gauntlet of anti-choice protesters for too long. I also want to pay special tribute to Clare Bailey, our former Northern Ireland Green colleague who secured the UK's first legislation on safe access zones. In true feminist style, we are all being lifted up in Scotland by the work of our sisters elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call Beatrice Wishart, again around 4 minutes. Ms Wishart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I am pleased to speak on behalf of Scottish Liberal Democrats in today's debate. My party will be supporting the Abortion Services Safe Access Zone Scotland Bill this afternoon and will be pleased to see it passed. I'd like to voice my thanks to Gillian Mackay, Back Off Scotland, and to all those who have worked so hard to get us here today. Presiding Officer, we've seen an emotive and at times robust discussion during this bill's progress through Parliament, but the fact is that too many women seeking to access abortion services in Scotland have been forced to cross a picket line to access medical treatment. Healthcare staff working in treatment centres are also exposed to these protests every working day. Scottish Liberal Democrats are clear that no one should have to cross a picket line to access medical treatment and that no health staff should be targeted for doing their jobs. Liberal Democrats believe passionately in the importance of civil liberties. Freedom of speech, religious freedoms and the right to protest are paramount, but that has never meant that anything goes. In passing this bill today, we are ensuring that anyone accessing medical care can do so without fear of harassment. We're safeguarding the right to medical privacy. Those who oppose abortion and want to make their voices heard are free to do so anywhere that isn't at the doors of a clinic. Those picketing clinics are not protesting in the usual sense, for example, advocating for a change in the law. They are pressuring individuals and attempting to change their mind on the most intimate of matters at the most vulnerable time. The decision on whether to have an abortion should be conducted in a safe and confidential environment with the help of trained professionals who are qualified to offer the appropriate advice and support. And most Scots agree. A recent poll showed that 82% of Scots think that protesters should be kept a minimum distance away from those attending healthcare facilities. And I'm pleased to see that there is broad consensus in support of this measure. So to conclude, Presiding Officer, Scottish Liberal Democrats believe that introducing buffer zones around clinics is a reasonable and proportionate step to take to protect safe access to abortion services in Scotland, and we're pleased to support this bill at stage 3 today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now move to the open debate. I call first Eleanor Whittam to be followed by Tess White. Around 4 minutes. Ms Whittam.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And firstly, may I too place on record my deep appreciation to Gillian Mackay for her tireless work getting her important bill to this stage today. Its significance is actually monumental. May I also thank her team, the committee, and the pressure brought to bear by the resolute activities of Back Off Scotland, the brave women and staff, and the Humanist Society of Scotland, who have ensured that women's rights to access healthcare have been so vocally championed. And I refer members to my register of interest that I am a member of the Humanist Society. Presiding Officer, abortion care is healthcare, and women must have the right to access such care without fear of and freedom from intimidation, harassment or public judgment. This is a core belief for me and was formed when, as a 15-year-old in Quebec, I watched as a fellow female citizen named Chantal Daigle was blocked from abortion care by her ex-partner when he sought and was granted an injunction. I protested in the streets of Montreal as she took her case all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada, ultimately winning and securing women's rights across the country. And as we see the reversal of landmark Roe versus Wade judgment and women's rights increasingly impacted globally, we must resist anything that interferes with us exercising our hard-fought-for rights. We must be able to exercise our bodily autonomy without anyone else seeking to persuade us or influence us as we approach a facility for care or indeed after we leave. No service user, nor the providers of such care, should have to run the gauntlet of protesters as they access abortion care. Everyone has the right to agree or disagree with abortion, and fundamentally that is not the issue that we are here dealing with today. This bill is about the right and the ability of women to access this type of health care free from the fear of being publicly shamed or judged as women have been for millennia. I am fully aware that this legislation also has at its heart the balancing of rights under the European Convention on Human Rights, specifically the rights of and freedoms of religion or belief, expression and assembly, and the right to respect for family and private life. It is important, as has been said already, that we look to the recent unanimous decision by the UK Supreme Court, who ruled that safe access zone legislation passed in Northern Ireland as being fully compatible with protesters' convention rights. In a very detailed legal analysis, the judgment examined the well-versed argument that convention rights are sacrosanct, the much-touted unlimited free speech argument. Rights are often misrepresented in this way, but it has always been that convention rights can be legally restricted in a proportionate way in certain contexts to achieve a legitimate aim. As underlined by the Supreme Court, abortion is legal as a result of democratic decision-making, and opponents of such legal healthcare cannot be given unfettered access or ability to harass or intimidate individuals or healthcare providers going about their daily life or work. Indeed, there is no legitimate reason for protesters to take their protest outside abortion clinics. To do so represents an attempt to undermine the rights of individuals whom the Parliament has given legal rights to abortion care, and to create a climate of fear to dissuade their access to necessary health care. At stage 2, much was said about silent prayer and policing of thoughts. This bill in no way seeks to criminalise prayer nor thoughts. What it does do is seek to curtail activities that go beyond unobtrusive silent prayer, or indeed legitimate chaplaincy services. For much of history, women have been subjected to having people standing in judgment of them silently or otherwise. We cannot ignore the profound impact walking past those who choose to stand in judgment. As the committee heard directly in evidence, one person's idea of engaging in silent prayer can look very different to the person on the other side who is alone and accessing health care. We must bring it firmly back to intent. What are the intentions of those gathered? Presiding Officer, it is my hope that today across this chamber we can all support Gillian Mackay's Safe Access Zone bill. I've been heartened by the collective working demonstrated thus far, both at the committee stages and today. This bill is not an attempt to restrict freedom of expression or religion, but to safeguard public health and to protect the right of women to access healthcare without obstruction. Women deserve no less. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call Tess White, around 4 minutes. Ms White.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This is a complex topic with varied and sometimes polarising points of view. But this bill isn't about abortion, as we've heard today. It's about women being able to access the health care they need at what can be a vulnerable, isolating and difficult time. Like other Health, Social Care and Sport Committee members, I'd also like to thank the convener, clerks, witnesses and all those who submitted evidence during the passage of the bill. The Parliament has handled this issue with both sensitivity and security in mind, and I thank everyone involved in this undertaking. Presiding Officer, the Abortion Services Safe Access Zone Scotland Bill has achieved cross-party consensus, and I'm pleased to support it today at stage 3. As the Law Society of Scotland emphasises, any restriction on Articles 8, 9, 10 and 11 of the European Convention on Human Rights is a careful balancing exercise. I'm a staunch defender of free speech, but I recognise that this must not come at the expense of women's health and our right to access medical services free of prejudice. Women have a right to access reproductive health care unimpeded by protests. They also have a right to privacy, especially when it comes to their own health. I was struck by one story shared by Back Off Scotland at the start of the bill's parliamentary passage about a pregnant mum. She received the devastating diagnosis at her 20-week scan that her baby had something seriously wrong with her heart. And she said, "I had to make a decision whether to finish the pregnancy and allow her to die or to terminate." She added that the protesters made her feel like a monster for the decision to have an abortion and that she suffered from PTSD. Terminations, she continued, are a much-needed service for many reasons, and no one should be made to feel like a monster for using the service. Her experience is a sobering reminder of why we're here today. We know at least 12 hospitals and clinics have been targeted across Scotland since 2017, including Aberdeen Maternity Hospital in my region. It's clear, Presiding Officer, the existing legislative framework has not prevented these protests. Scotland is the only part of the UK not to have safe access zone legislation in place, with Westminster legislating last year and Stormont back in 2021. Presiding Officer, against this background, it is right that we legislate on this issue, but it is right too that we strengthen the bill as much as possible so that it protects women, not just when it is enacted, but in the years to come. That's why I focus my amendments at Stage 2 and Stage 3 on post-legislative scrutiny, and I'm pleased the Scottish Government has been receptive to these changes. The test now, Presiding Officer, will be how the bill's provisions are enforced and the impact they will have on women accessing abortion services and the staff that support them. We will be watching. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms White. We move to closing speeches, and I call first Ross Greer, around 4 minutes. Mr Greer.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Green Party today are incredibly proud of our friend and colleague Gillian Mackay. Gillian said in opening that this bill and this debate could have been divisive, but it hasn't been. There has been disagreement, both inside and outside of Parliament, but that disagreement has been respectful. And I think this has been an example of Parliament at its best, something that wasn't guaranteed, particularly given the overlap with an election campaign towards the end. But we've been tackling a very real issue facing those we represent. We've been balancing competing rights. That's one of the hardest tasks that members of this Parliament have, and I think Parliament has done so and done it well, and it's to the credit of the whole Parliament, but it is particularly to the credit of Gillian Mackay for setting the tone, for reaching out both to MSPs and to those on both sides of the debate across Scotland outside of this place. As Gillian said, democracy doesn't survive when opposing voices are silenced. This debate made space for all perspectives, but it didn't need to, because let's be honest, the numbers are so overwhelmingly on one side here. Beatrix Swisher pointed out that those who oppose abortion will still have the right to protest. And like so many other rights, when it comes into conflict with others, that will now be appropriately caveated by the requirement to simply do so a reasonable distance away from abortion service providers, so that those seeking to access that, to exercise their right to healthcare and their right to do so in privacy, are able to do that. The bill isn't about abortion itself, as Megan Gallagher said, but the debate has made clear the overwhelming strength of feeling behind the right to abortion and the right to women's bodily autonomy. There is no going back. Eleanor Whittam's experience of protesting in Montreal made clear that this is a struggle that has been and continues to be a global one. But almost 6 decades on from the 1967 Abortion Act in Great Britain, abortion is still politicised like almost no other area of healthcare. And access to healthcare is a fundamental right. But we know, and it has been made very clear by the evidence gathered in this process, that women's right to access reproductive healthcare is being compromised in Scotland right now by anti-abortion protests. Anyone is free to hold to an anti-abortion or pro-life point of view, but their right to do so does not trump a woman's right to access healthcare. And as I said, this is a question of balancing rights. We are ultimately placing a small restriction on the right to protest and religious expression to allow others to fully exercise their right to healthcare. And I sincerely believe it is a small restriction. This is not a ban on protest. It is simply about proximity. I feel very privileged to have taken part in the Stage 1 and Stage 2 proceedings on this. Members will be glad to know that I'm not about to repeat my theology lesson from Stage 1, but I was glad to speak, and I'm glad to speak today and to vote for this bill because of my faith, not in spite of it. I very much agree with Carol Mockin's comments about the Stage 2 proceedings. I thought they were a first-class example of effective committee scrutiny and consideration, and they have resulted in a strengthened bill. There's no doubt about the result of today's vote, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Greens, as I said, are so proud of what Gillian Mackay has achieved for women in Scotland today. This is a good day for our Parliament. It is a good day for Scotland. It is a good day for the women who will now have the protection that they deserve when they are accessing their right to healthcare. The Scottish Greens will, of course, be voting for the Abortion Services Safe Access Zone Bill.
Thank you, Mr Greer. I now call Monica Lennon, around 4 minutes. Ms Lennon.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm pleased to close the debate today on behalf of Scottish Labour, following on from my colleague Carol Mockin's contributions in the opening speeches today. Members across the Chamber have made some really important and thoughtful contributions this afternoon, and I am pleased that we have been able to debate the Abortion Services Safe Access Zone Scotland Bill with respect for different views and for different perspectives. And I'm glad that this approach has characterised the entire scrutiny of the bill as it's made its journey through Parliament. And I hope that even those who don't support the bill feel that their views have been heard and have been respected. I want to join others in thanking Gillian Mackay and her team for their hard work in progressing the bill to stage 3 and pay tribute to the courageous and tenacious young women behind Back Off Scotland, as others have recognised today, because we know that grassroots campaigning does make the difference and has helped to bring this important issue all the way to the Scottish Parliament. There are so many people to thank, so I'm not going to name names because time is short, but people know who they are. And I'm grateful, as colleagues have mentioned, to the Health, Social Care and Sport Committee for all its hard work throughout stage 1 and 2, and to all those who gave evidence. Carol Mockin paid tribute to the quality of that evidence. And as Tess White has said, complex issues had to be examined, but that happened in a calm and collaborative fashion, as we've heard today in the way that amendments have been disposed of. And I think that's an example that the Parliament should look to in future as we continue to deal with challenging and complex issues. I've always believed, and Scottish Labour have always recognised, that this bill is necessary because in recent years we have seen an escalation in the number of protests and the number of activities that have taken place at clinics where healthcare is provided, including abortion healthcare. In the stage 1 speech, I mentioned the fact that at University Hospital Wishaw we've seen such protests happening for the first time, and Tess White mentioned Aberdeen maternity, but colleagues will know about situations in their own regions or where constituents have had to travel and what that experience has been. And as we've heard, that can cause trauma on the day, but trauma that can last well into the future. And it's the impact on healthcare workers too, and I'm glad that colleagues have recognised that. As colleagues have recognised, we all respect the right to religious freedom and the right for people to express their views in different ways, but these are qualified rights and they can never be a mask for harassment or intimidation. As Beatrice Wishart said a few moments ago, this is about safeguarding the right to medical privacy, and it's evident that we have to do something, and that's why the bill has got to this stage today. So hopefully tonight, when the bill, I hope, does pass, people will feel reassured that the scrutiny of this legislation doesn't end today, that there are opportunities for ongoing scrutiny, and that the bill will be, or the Act hopefully will be implemented in a way that is proportionate and that common sense will be used when decisions have to be made. But as we've heard from colleagues, including Eleanor Whittam, we know that there are forces at work that want to really push back on women's hard-fought for rights, including our rights to bodily autonomy, and we do have to take care on that. But hopefully people recognise that the evidence has been looked at in a very careful manner, and I hope tonight that even those who don't support the bill recognise that all views have been respected and heard, and that all points are valid, but this legislation is really necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Lennon. I now call Standish Gulhani, again around 4 minutes. Dr Gulhani.
Thank you. I wish to refer members to my declaration of interest as a practising NHS GP. We're focused this afternoon on a fundamental right. It's imperative that we create a respectful and secure environment for any woman seeking any medical care. By supporting safe access zones, we uphold the fundamental rights and dignity of all women in our community. But we must also be cautious of unintended consequences, such as limiting free speech. There is no place in Scotland for the thought police. By supporting safe access zones, we seek to balance safety with the preservation of fundamental rights and dignity for all. And the Scottish Conservatives will be supporting this bill. I'm also very happy to see true cross-party working on this bill and thank Gillian Mackay for bringing this bill to Parliament. Jeremy Balfour's reasonable amendment to allow NHS workers in the chaplaincy service to go about their work without falling foul of this bill was something that I would have liked to have seen brought forward. Having worked in hospitals, I do know firsthand of the vital work that the chaplaincy service does provide from people of all faiths. I do not want to create any areas on the NHS estate with potentially of no-go areas for our chaplaincy services. But I do understand the exception within the bill and also the reassurance given by the Minister of recklessness being a very high bar. Megan Gallagher was right when she said that this bill would not have been possible without the brave women who came forward to speak about their experiences. And like Carol Mocken, I agree that the quality of evidence provided by our witnesses at Health Committee was very high, allowing effective scrutiny of this bill. Reproductive health centres provide essential legal medical services, and it's imperative no woman feels stigmatised or discouraged from accessing these services. Making the decision to have an abortion is often one of the most challenging choices a woman faces, and it's crucial that we support her right to make this decision without added stress or intimidation. We, the Scottish Conservatives, uphold the rights to protest and free speech, yet we firmly believe that these rights must not come at the expense of women's health, as Tess White said. Women must be able to exercise their right to access medical services free of prejudice, and balancing these competing rights is no small task, but it is one that we must undertake with care and dedication. The Law Society of Scotland has highlighted key considerations that should guide the implementation of safe access zones, and these include ensuring that any new legislation aligns with established human rights principles. As MSPs, one of our key functions is to make laws. Presiding Officer, we must ensure we make laws that are not only just and equitable, but forward-thinking and adaptable to the changes and challenges of our time. Thank you.
Thank you. And I call on Jenny Minto, up to 4 minutes, Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As I set out in my opening remarks, it has been a privilege to support this bill. It is unacceptable that anyone using or providing abortion services should do so with the fear of intimidation, judgment or unwanted influence. And in a few moments, I hope that we will be enshrining that principle in law, providing the protection and comfort that Maggie Chapman spoke of. I have worked with a dedicated team of officials who have supported me throughout. When I was appointed Minister of Public Health and Women's Health, the Government's groundwork for Gillian Mackay's bill had been led by Nicola Sturgeon, Hamza Youssef and Marie Todd, all of whom I give my heartfelt thanks to today. I had much to learn, but thanks to my officials' calm and considered approach, I was able to ask questions and get into the fine detail of the legislation, so I thank them. I again thank Gillian Mackay, who has been resolute in her efforts to ensure this bill is the best it can be. Her connections across the chamber and out with have ensured everyone's voice has been heard in a respectful manner. I hope every single one of us will take a leaf out of Miss Mackay's book as to how to listen, collaborate and legislate her manner. Sorry, Miss White, I won't. I'm going to start this again, because I think this is incredibly important. I again thank Gillian Mackay, who has been resolute in her efforts to ensure this bill is the best it can be. Her connections across this chamber and out with have ensured everyone's voice has been heard in a respectful manner. I hope every single one of us will take a leaf out of Miss Mackay's book as to how to listen, collaborate and legislate. Her manner is exemplary. I thank colleagues too for the tone of this afternoon's debate, and as I noted in my opening remarks, the thoughtful way that members have discussed their concerns regarding the bill with myself and Ms Mackay. I will single out a few of the points made, although by no means all of them, given the brief time that I have. Megan Gallagher was correct. We need legislation that works. And I absolutely agree with Carol Mochan about the Stage 2 debate. It was open and honest and very, very helpful. And I hope the post-legislation scrutiny is treated in the same manner. Beatrice Wishart, I agree with a lot of what you've said with regard to 82% of Scots agreeing that women should be able to access healthcare safely. And Elena Whittam, thank you for your historical and international perspectives, but as always, bringing it back to intent. Tess White, you talked about sensitivity and security for women, and that's at the heart of this bill. And I think you're right as well to ensure that we strengthen and scrutinise the legislation, and thank you for the amendments that you brought in. Ross Greer is correct. Parliament has been at its best. And the line, not a ban on protests but on proximity, I wish you'd said that earlier, Ross. I think you're absolutely right. And Monica Lennon, your comments around the courageousness and the tenaciousness of campaigning of grassroots organisations and also healthcare staff got us where we are today. And Sandesh Gulhani talked about balance, and I believe that this legislation has achieved that. Presiding Officer, I'm pleased that it has been recognised during this debate that the bill is not an attempt to restrict freedom of expression, but to safeguard public health and protect the right of women to access healthcare without obstruction. Although this is a small bill, its reach cannot be underestimated, and I think that is best summed up by Lucy Grieve, who gave evidence on the bill. Lucy was very clear, and I quote, that the legislation will not only protect abortion patients, but those who have been harassed and intimidated when accessing miscarriage management or for sexual assault support, as well as partners of those accessing care. I urge every member to join me in bringing that reality a step closer.
Thank you. And I call on Gillian Mackay to wind up the debate.
Presiding Officer, I'm very conscious that I've spoken many times today and members will be very relieved that this will be the last. There is, by this point, very little to be said that hasn't been said already. However, I make no apologies for repeating myself. I'm grateful that we finished Stage 3 today as we started Stage 1, with respect, candour and the best interests of those using services front and centre. I don't think it can be said too often that women's access to healthcare is not up for debate. Women seeking to access a very personal form of healthcare should not be judged or condemned by strangers. And the people who provide those services to women, who, by the way, are predominantly mostly female, should not go to work expecting or fearing that they will be confronted or called names. And that's why I brought this bill forward. Because women and staff deserve abortion services that are provided with the same privacy and respect as any other piece of medical care. And I note in that regard that the bill has been explicitly drafted so that activity that supports abortion could amount to an offence in exactly the same way as activities that oppose abortion. And that underlines the central point. Medical services should not be a battleground. Away from the places that provide abortion services, people can continue to debate the topic of abortion. Within 200 metres of premises providing abortion services, women and staff will be protected. And as I said at the beginning of this debate, the protections are limited, but the benefits are huge. I hope that while abortion rights in some parts of the world are going backwards, Scotland can be seen as a cause for hope. Presiding Officer, I want to use most of my time to thank those who have made this bill a reality. As Maggie Chapman did, I want to thank Clare Bailey for blazing a trail for all of us to follow. A thanks to all of the organisations who have been involved and championed this bill from the start. To back off Scotland, it can't be understated how instrumental they and BPAS have been in getting this bill to where it is. Other supporters, including the RCN, the SUC's Women's Committee, the Humanist Society of Scotland, the Royal Colleges, the BMA, Abortion Rights Scotland and Gender, the UCU and a whole load more. To the clinical staff and their unions, who not only spoke up about the impact of activity outside their services, but who also took time to answer questions about clinical care, access routes and service locations to inform our understanding, their time, effort and obvious passion for helping women, whatever their circumstances, has been hugely appreciated. To colleagues from all parties across the Chamber who have provided encouragement and support from the outset, I've been more grateful than you know. To my wonderful Green colleagues, thank you for your support, for substituting for me at committee and bureau when I needed to do other things, and generally being the cheerleaders that you are. A huge thank you to the current and former Minister for Women's Health. Not only have they been incredible support to the bill, they've also been wonderful friends and encouraged me and shared their experience. I absolutely have a newfound respect for ministers as a result of this process. To all the First Ministers this session who have given their support and the support of Government to the bill, a huge thank you. That support and expertise has been invaluable to the progress of this bill. And that leads me very nicely onto one of the biggest thank yous. Bills are never by any means a solo effort. MSPs are just the ones privileged enough to be allowed to guide them through. The real heroes in this are the officials and the staff teams who've helped make this a reality. The abortion policy team have been incredible. They've taken me under their wing and delivered above and beyond on everything we've asked for, answered all the daft questions I had, and have poured their all into this bill. My office team and the wider Green Group staff, both past and present, have been second to none. They're our squad of cheerleaders, my fairest critics, and the ones that make sure everything else gets done. Thank you for all of your work. And to all the staff teams around the Chamber who've moved meetings and supported their MSPs, thank you for your efforts too. My second to last thank you, Presiding Officer, has to go to my family who've put up with listening to me talk about this bill endlessly for the last 2.5 years and have always had my back. But the biggest thank you, Presiding Officer, has to go to those who came forward to share their experiences outside abortion clinics, even when it meant reliving incredibly difficult and painful experiences. I hope they all know that this bill exists because of them. Maya Angelou said, "Each time a woman stands up for herself, she stands up for all women." And that's exactly what each one of them did by speaking out. I urge this Chamber to honour that and to stand up for women by voting yes to the bill at stage 3. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the debate on Abortion Services Safe Access Zones Scotland Bill at stage 3. It's now time to move on to the next item of business, which is consideration of Business Motion 13585 in the name of Jamie Hepburn on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau setting out a business programme. And I call on the Minister to move the motion.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. No member has asked to speak to the motion, and the question is that motion 13585 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. The motion is therefore agreed. The next item of business is consideration of Parliamentary Bureau Motion 13616 on approval of an SSI, and I ask Jamie Hepburn, on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau, to move the motion.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister, and I call on Russell Findlay. Up to 3 minutes, please.
Officer, the Scottish Government constantly tells us that too many people are in prison, but they never identify who should not be in prison, and they never identify which sentences are wrong. Every single prison sentence is decided by the independent judiciary, and the Government today will seek to undermine those individual decisions by ordering the mass emergency release of up to 550 prisoners. The Justice Secretary says she cannot build her way out of this crisis, and she's right to say so. But her government should have built replacements for crumbling HMP Barlinnie and others. This is one area of neglect enduring 17 years of SNP rule. Not only have they failed to build new prisons, they've also failed to invest in meaningful community sentencing that can be trusted by the judiciary and the public. Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government has been engaged in a soft PR campaign ahead of today's plans. Is there any time in hand?
Keith Brown.
Can I thank Mr Findlay for giving way? I wonder if you'd acknowledge that part of the reason we have such stringent capital controls is because of a decision of the Westminster Government, where the prison estate is in a far worse condition in Scotland, and they have far greater problems from overcrowding. Can you not accept some responsibility from his party for the current situation?
Russell Findlay.
a former Justice Secretary, 17 years of neglect. This is the same man who recently said that any prisoners leaving prisons in England might maraud across the border and commit crimes here. Not only have they failed to build new prisons, they've been embarked on a soft PR campaign ahead of today's plans. For almost a year, a procession of senior SPS officials have been given freedom to speak to the media about the prison crisis. If only this anti-transparency government encouraged such candour across our public services. Many victims of serious crimes will first hear about this on tonight's news. This will cause fear and anxiety. Prisoners being set free will have committed serious crimes, including violence. When the government previously freed hundreds of prisoners in 2020, Victim Support Scotland called for victims to be automatically informed of any future release. Is there any more time in hand for another intervention?
We have a little time.
Thank you.
Holly McNeill.
Thank you. Does the member agree that this is an unsatisfactory way to deal with such substantive legislative issues, and that it has been very rushed and now I only have a chance to speak by intervening on the member? But does he share Scottish Labour's concerns that the rising prison population was known about for some time? And if we are to agree to the release of up to 500 prisoners 180 days before their due release date, there is no guarantee that it won't happen again, as happened in COVID, that there was a high offending rate. I did find this a difficult decision this morning, but does he further agree with me that victims' organisations don't seem fully satisfied that although victims will get notified if they're part of the scheme, the vast majority are not part of the scheme and they will not therefore be automatically notified? Does the member share my concerns about this? And will the Governor's veto be enough as an extra safeguard for public concerns?
Russell Finlay.
I completely agree with the member with much of what she says, and also her frustrations about the speed of this and the lack of engagement that she's been able to have. Returning to the automatic information passed to victims, that will not happen despite Victim Support Scotland asking for this. Instead, victims will have to go looking for this information. They'll have to ask one of 4 designated organisations, Victim Support Scotland, Rape Crisis Scotland, Assist or Children First. These organisations will then need to ask the prison service. By the time victims get an answer, it seems likely that some prisoners will already have been freed. 5 times this morning, I asked the Cabinet Secretary to clarify this simple but important point, but she failed to do so. And it was only yesterday that victims' groups were even given sight of the information sharing agreement. This is shambolic, and it proves that victims' rights are an afterthought at best. The government likes to take the moral high ground by preaching about smart justice, but it is not smart, it is weak. The emergency mass release will result in more crime. That's what happened the last time. We cannot support this, and to do so would be to fail victims and risk encouraging this government to believe this is the new normal. Thank you.
Thank you, and I call on Angela Constance, Cabinet Secretary, to respond.
Presiding Officer, I am very grateful to both the Delegated Powers and Legal Reform Committee, as well as the Criminal Justice Committee, who I had spent considerable time with this morning, for their careful scrutiny of these regulations. And I'm also very grateful to Justice spokespeople and the individual MSPs and stakeholders who have engaged with me on this matter and on the specifics of the regulations in front of us this afternoon. Yes, we have had to move at pace because we have an emergency situation that we have to respond to now, but there has been parliamentary scrutiny every step of the way with these regulations, and that is in contrast to the secret release plans that are taking place south of the border. Presiding Officer, I have and will continue to keep Parliament updated of the position that we face within our prisons and, crucially, the actions that we are taking to address this. But despite our efforts, the prison population has increased by 13% since the start of 2023, with a spike since March 2024. This morning, there were 8,294 people in custody in our care. And that recent, sharp and unanticipated rise of 400 more prisoners in a space of a few months now places the security of prisons and the safety of prisoners and staff at significant risk. I will indeed, Mr Green.
Jamie Green.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for taking intervention? What percentage of our prison population are currently on remand? And if we got through those cases more quickly, surely we wouldn't have to release prisoners who have already been convicted.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, 27% of the male population are on remand, and in any given week the percentage of the female population on remand varies between 32 to 38%. Our remand population is too high, and there are a number of efforts to address that, including court recovery and our investment in alternatives to remand. But, Presiding Officer, I am very clear that I have a responsibility to act, and that my appeal to Parliament tonight is that we cannot allow our prisons to become unsafe, and that immediate and urgent action is now needed to ensure that prisons can still function safely and focus on those who pose the greatest risk of harm. Presiding Officer, I very much recognise the public and victims' concerns about the use of these powers, and I want to emphasise that protecting the public remains my absolute priority. And that is why I have added additional extra protections and safeguards to the statutory exclusions that exist in the legislation that this Parliament passed last year. Only prisoners serving less than 4 years who are due for release within 180 days following the date on which the regulations came into force will be eligible for release. Modelling suggests that the majority of those eligible for release will be within 90 days of their earliest date of liberation and will be serving sentences that are less than 2 years. And I'll give way for the last time to Ms Chapman.
Maggie Chapman.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for taking my intervention. I would just like to put on record that the Scottish Greens will be supporting this instrument at decision time later on, because we are too concerned about the safety and well-being of our prisons, the prisoners and the people who work in them. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary to say a little bit more about that modelling? What modelling has been done on the impacts of this instrument, particularly on women and other vulnerable prisoners, in terms of their safety and well-being?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, some of the modelling that I shared with the Criminal Justice Committee, based on work that was done dated the 10th of June, so it is indicative and it can change, indicate that 70 women would be eligible for release. That is 31% of the sentenced female population, and that is in comparison to 11% of the sentenced male population. Further to the safeguards, Presiding Officer, prisoners subject to the Sex Offenders Register are not eligible. Prisoners serving a sentence for domestic abuse offences are not eligible. Prisoners who have previously served a sentence for a domestic abuse offence, if it is unspent, are not eligible. And prisoners subject to non-harassment orders are not eligible either. Further, Governor veto applies, which allows governors to prevent the release of an otherwise eligible prisoner if they consider they would pose an immediate risk to a specific individual or group. Governors will access a range of risk-relevant information from police, social work and other partners to inform that decision. I very much recognise that provision of information to victims is a particular concern. Victims who have signed up to the Victim Notification Scheme will automatically be notified, and we are working with victim support organisations to increase other victims' awareness of how they can access information if that is what they want. No thank you. The regulations name 4 victim support organisations so that they can receive information about the release of a prisoner if the victim in their case has given consent. That is intended to support a more trauma-informed approach. Presiding Officer, using emergency release is not a decision I took recently. I would not be asking Parliament to approve these regulations if I did not think this action is necessary to keep our prisons safe. I know at the end of the day we all want the same thing. We want fewer crimes, less victims and safer communities. And what happens in our prisons is a matter of profound public interest. Prisons are there absolutely to punish and protect, but they are also there to rehabilitate and reintegrate, and that has a direct bearing on public safety. We have 3,000 Scottish Prison Service staff who are operational staff and also prison officers. And each and every day they put themselves on the front line for us and the communities that we seek to serve. They need to know that we've got their back. They need to know that help is coming. And members, quite rightly, can critique the past. Believe me, I do. And we will indeed debate the future. And I know very much what MSPs are against, but we now need to show, going forward, in the not too distant future, when we return to Parliament after recess, we now need to show what we are for. But the question tonight is, what are we prepared to do now, Presiding Officer? And I will just finally remind members of the letter that I received from the Prison Governors Association that said to me they are only just coping and remain concerned that emergency action will only be taken when something goes significantly wrong. What we must do now is prevent something significantly going wrong. Thank you.
Thank you. The question on this motion will be put at decision time. The next item of business is consideration of 9 Parliamentary Bureau motions, and I ask Jamie Hepburn, on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau, to move motions 13586 to 13594 on approval of SSIs.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. And the question on these motions will be put at decision time. And I'm minded to accept a motion without notice under Rule 11.2.4 of Standing Orders that decision time be brought forward to now. And I invite the Minister for Parliamentary Business to move the motion.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. And the question is that decision time be brought forward to now. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed, and there are 3 questions to be put. The first is that motion 13571 in the name of Gillian Mackay on Abortion Services Safe Access Zones Scotland Bill be agreed. Now, as this is a motion to pass the bill at stage 3, the question must be decided by division. And as members have been voting throughout the afternoon, I will allow a moment for members to refresh their voting apps. Today's pin is 4772. 4772. The question is that motion 13571 in the name of Gillian Mackay on Abortion Services Safe Access Zones Scotland Bill be agreed, and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on motion 13571 in the name of Gillian Mackay is yes 118, no 1. There were no abstentions. The motion is therefore agreed and the Abortion Services Safe Access Zones Scotland Bill is passed. Thank you. The next question is that motion 13616 in the name of Jamie Hepburn on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau on approval of an SSI be agreed. Are we all agreed? No. The Parliament is not agreed, therefore we will move to a vote and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. I call Neil Gray for a point of order.
Sir, apologies, I couldn't connect to the app. I would have voted yes.
I can confirm that your vote was recorded, Mr Gray. The result of the vote on motion 13616 in the name of Jamie Hepburn is yes 66, no 47. There were 5 abstentions. The motion is therefore agreed. And I propose to ask a single question on 9 Parliamentary Bureau motions. Does any member object? No member objects. The final question is that motions 13586 to 13594 on approval of SSIs in the name of Jamie Hepburn on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. The motions are therefore agreed, and that concludes decision time, and we will now move on to members' business in the name of Tim Eagle.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Lewis McGlynn.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Saoirse Healy.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart. Broadcasting Scotland is Scotland's independent broadcaster, providing factual news, reporting on the issues important to the people of Scotland.
We are committed to public service broadcasting, and with your support, we will produce even more programmes.
Provide opportunities for young people interested in media production and broadcasting, and challenge preconceptions of what Scottish media looks like, amplifying Scotland's voice and reflecting its communities.
We can already deliver high-quality live news, and we will create the highest quality programmes for you to enjoy. But we can only do that with your support.
So please subscribe to and share our channel or donate to Broadcasting Scotland via the link in the description. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.